Hello, everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If Prototype Antihero Was in DC Verse, Part 2. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
Origin 1. The Call. Flashback, 15 years ago. The rain hammered against the kitchen window of the Thorne house, each drop echoing through the cramped space. 10-year-old Alex sat at the wooden table, struggling with his math homework. Numbers had never made sense to him, not like they did for the smart kids at school. He chewed his pencil eraser, frustrated tears threatening as he stared at the multiplication problems that might as well have been written in another language. "These numbers don't lie, Sarah," his father whispered from across the kitchen, hunched over manila folders with his mother. David Thorne worked nights at the chemical plant and came home exhausted and covered in chemical residue that made Alex's eyes water. "The cancer rates in Sector 7 are 3 times normal." 3 times. Alex looked up from his homework, not really understanding but sensing the fear in his father's voice. His mother, Sarah, was a nurse at Gotham General. She saw sick people every day, but lately she'd been coming home quieter, sadder. "The timeline matches perfectly," his mother said, pointing at papers Alex couldn't read from where he sat. "Ever since Crane Industries expanded." "Daddy." Alex's voice was small and uncertain. He wasn't like the other kids, wasn't quick with answers or clever with words. Teacher spoke slowly to him. Other children rolled their eyes when he took too long to understand jokes. "Are people getting sick?" His parents looked at him with that expression he knew too well, the one that said he wouldn't understand anyway, so why bother explaining? But Alex had seen enough. Tommy down the street, who couldn't run without falling down. Little Mary, who wheezed and turned blue. The Kowalski twins, born too small and wrong. "Don't worry about grown-up things, sweetie," his mother said gently, the way people talked to him when they thought he was too slow to grasp what was happening. David spread out a map covered in red marks. Alex couldn't read well, but he could see their street was surrounded by X's. "We have to do something, Sarah. These families, they don't know what's being done to them." "The EPA inspector comes next week," his mother said, but her voice shook. "If we can prove what Crane Industries is dumping, they'll destroy us." David's hands trembled as he held a photograph. "Senator Crane owns half the city. Judge Thompson is his nephew. We're nobody, a night shift worker and a floor nurse. Who's going to listen?" Alex bent back over his homework, pretending not to listen, but the words carved themselves into his memory anyway. He might be slow at school and might struggle with reading and numbers, but he understood fear. He understood that his parents, the two people who loved him despite his limitations, were scared of something much bigger than they were. "There has to be someone," his mother whispered. "Someone who'll help." Outside, lightning illuminated the chemical plant's towers. Alex had walked past those gates every day on his way to school, never understanding why the air tasted wrong, why his throat burned, or why so many kids in his neighborhood got sick. He wasn't smart enough to understand the papers spread across the table and wasn't clever enough to solve problems or make plans. But in that moment, watching his parents huddle over evidence of something terrible, 10-year-old Alex Thorne made a simple, heartfelt wish. Someday, he wanted to be strong enough to help people like his mom and dad. Smart enough to understand. Powerful enough to make the bad people stop hurting everyone. He had no idea that wishes made in the shadow of evil sometimes came true in the most terrible ways possible. The rain continued to fall, washing poison from the sky into soil where children played, where families lived, and where good people like his parents fought battles they couldn't win. But in the quiet desperation of that kitchen, something was beginning, a slow burn of love and loss that would one day transform a struggling child into something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Origin 2. The Betrayal. Flashback, 14 years ago. The police station smelled like coffee and disappointment. 11-year-old Alex sat in a hard plastic chair, swinging his legs nervously while his mother paced in front of Detective Ray Palmer's desk. The manila folders, the same ones his parents had whispered over in their kitchen, lay spread across the detective's desk. Mrs. Thorne, I understand you're upset, Detective Palmer said, not looking up from the documents. He was a thin man with kind eyes who had always waved at Alex when he walked past their house. But what you're suggesting, these are very serious allegations against very important people. Look at the evidence. Sarah Thorne's voice cracked with desperation. She'd been crying for days since David had been fired from the chemical plant, terminated for performance issues after 15 years of perfect attendance. The cancer clusters, the birth defects, and the timeline match perfectly with Crane Industries' expansion. My husband documented everything. Alex didn't understand all the big words, but he knew his mother was scared. His father had been different since losing his job, quiet, jumping at every sound, and checking the locks obsessively. They'd stopped answering the phone. Stopped opening mail that wasn't Bill's. I've reviewed the materials, Palmer said carefully. But correlation isn't causation. Industrial accidents happen. People get sick. It doesn't mean what? Sarah slammed her hand on the desk. That a senator's family business might be cutting corners? That money matters more than children's lives. Detective Palmer glanced around the station nervously. Other officers were listening now, pretending to work while straining to hear. Mrs. Thorne, please lower your voice. Detective Palmer, Alex's mother leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. You have children. I've seen them at the school carnival. If this was happening in their neighborhood, wouldn't you want someone to listen? For a moment, Palmer's facade cracked. Alex saw something flicker across his face, recognition, maybe even agreement. The detective looked down at a photograph of a baby born with severe deformities, then at another showing dead fish floating in Crane Industries' drainage canal. Palmer started, then stopped. His phone was ringing. Excuse me. He answered it with a tired, Palmer here. Alex watched the detective's face change as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Palmer's eyes darted to Sarah Thorne, then to the evidence spread across his desk, then to the other officers who were no longer pretending not to listen. Yes, sir. I understand. Yes, sir. Right away. Palmer hung up and immediately began gathering the folders, photos, and documents. Mrs. Thorne, I'm afraid I can't help you with this matter. What? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Ray, you just looked at the evidence. I saw a grieving community looking for someone to blame for their troubles. Palmer's voice had changed, becoming official and cold. These materials don't constitute evidence of wrongdoing. They're speculation at best, inflammatory at worst. Alex watched his mother's face crumble. Ray, please. People are dying. Mrs. Thorne, I'm going to give you some advice. Palmer stood, the folders clutched protectively against his chest. Sometimes good people convince themselves they see patterns that aren't there. Sometimes grief and financial stress can make people unstable. I'd hate to see you or your family get hurt chasing conspiracy theories. The threat was polite but unmistakable. Alex might not understand politics or corruption, but he understood fear. Detective Palmer was scared, more scared of whoever had called than he was of letting children die. You're destroying the evidence, Sarah said, her voice hollow with realization. What evidence? Palmer was already walking toward a filing cabinet. I don't see any evidence here. Just the confused ramblings of a woman under stress. Alex watched the man he'd thought was one of the good guys, the friendly police officer who'd helped him find his lost bike last summer, feed his parents' life's work into a paper shredder. Document by document, photograph by photograph, every proof of Crane Industries' crimes became confetti. Mrs. Thorne, Palmer said without looking at her, I suggest you and your family focus on moving forward. Your husband was fired for cause. I'd recommend he find new employment, somewhere else. Gotham's a big city. Lots of opportunities in other neighborhoods. They were being exiled. Driven out for the crime of telling the truth. What about the children who are sick? Alex's mother asked, her voice barely audible. What about the families who don't know they're being poisoned? Palmer finally looked up from the shredder, and Alex saw something die in the detective's eyes, some last vestige of the man who'd once helped a lost boy find his bicycle. What children? Palmer said. I don't know what you're talking about. That night, Alex lay in bed listening to his parents whisper argue in the kitchen. His mother was crying. His father kept apologizing, as if it was his fault that good people had turned out to be cowards, that the system they'd trusted had abandoned them. We have to keep trying, his mother insisted. The EPA inspector will get the same phone call Palmer did, his father said bitterly. Face it, Sarah. We're alone in this. Nobody's coming to help. Alex stared at the ceiling, his 11-year-old mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. The police, who were supposed to protect people, had thrown away evidence of children being poisoned. A man they trusted, who'd known Alex since he was small, had chosen to serve power instead of justice. In the darkness of his bedroom, something fundamental shifted in Alex Thorne's understanding of the world. Good people weren't rewarded. Truth didn't matter. The system wasn't broken, it was working exactly as designed, protecting the powerful while sacrificing the innocent. 2 weeks later, his father would be dead and Alex would be transformed into something that could never again believe in the goodness of institutions or the reliability of heroes. But the real transformation had already begun here, in a police station that smelled like coffee and cowardice, watching justice get fed through a paper shredder one document at a time. Origin 3. The Facto. Flashback, 14 years ago, 1 week after police station. The phone calls had started 3 days ago. Alex pressed his ear to his bedroom door, listening to his parents' hushed voices in the kitchen. They thought he was asleep, but the fear in their whispers kept him awake. His father's voice was different now, hollow, defeated in a way Alex had never heard before. They know where I work, Sarah. They know Alex's school schedule. They know your shift rotations at the hospital. David, maybe we should, what? Run. With what money? I can't get hired anywhere in the city. Palmer made sure of that. One phone call and suddenly I'm unreliable and have anger management issues. Alex didn't understand all the words, but he understood the tone. They were trapped. Earlier that day, walking home from school, Alex had noticed the same black car following him for 3 blocks. When he'd stopped to tie his shoe, the car stopped too. When he'd started walking faster, it had matched his pace. By the time he'd reached his street, his heart was pounding so hard he thought he might throw up. At dinner, he tried to tell his parents about the car, but they just exchanged one of their looks, the kind that said Alex was probably imagining things again. He was always getting confused about details, mixing up faces, and seeing patterns that weren't there. Maybe he had imagined it. But then his father had double-checked all the locks after dinner. And his mother had moved the kitchen knives to a drawer closer to the table. And neither of them had slept, judging by the whispers that had continued past midnight. Now it was morning, and his father was getting ready for another day of job hunting that everyone knew was pointless. David Thorne moved around the kitchen like a man walking to his execution, checking the windows, peering through the blinds. Maybe I should call in sick, his mother said, still in her nurse's uniform but making no move toward the door. We need the money, his father replied automatically. And if you don't show up, they'll know we're scared. We are scared. The simple admission hung in the air like smoke. Alex pressed harder against his door, wishing he could do something, anything, to help. But he was just a slow kid who couldn't even do his own homework. The phone rang. All 3 Thorns froze. The phone rang again. And again. Let the machine get it, his mother whispered. On the 4th ring, the answering machine clicked on. Alex's own voice played back, cheerful, innocent, recorded months ago when the world still made sense. Hi. You've reached the Thorne family. We can't come to the phone right now, but we know you're there. The voice was calm, professional, and terrifyingly polite. Alex felt ice water run down his spine. Mr. Thorne, this is your final warning. Some problems resolve themselves naturally when left alone. Others require more direct intervention. You have 24 hours to decide which category your problem falls into. The line went dead. In the kitchen, Alex heard his mother start to cry, not the frustrated tears from the police station, but deep, hopeless sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she couldn't control. "I'm so sorry," his father whispered. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I thought if we just followed the rules, told the truth, somebody would listen." I know you did. What kind of man am I? I can't even protect my own family." Through his bedroom door, Alex heard his father break down completely, harsh, choking sounds that no child should have to hear from their parent. His strong, hard-working father, reduced to this by people who hurt children for money and faced no consequences. Alex slipped back to his bed and pulled the covers over his head, but he couldn't block out the sounds of his parents' world collapsing. Couldn't stop thinking about the black car, the phone calls, and the way Detective Palmer had fed their evidence into a shredder like it was garbage. Somewhere in the city, men in expensive suits were probably having breakfast, reading newspapers, and kissing their wives goodbye before heading to offices where they made decisions about who lived and who died. They slept well at night because the system protected them. They never had to choose between their principles and their family's safety. But his parents did. His family did. That night, 11-year-old Alex Thorne lay in his bed listening to his parents cry and learned that sometimes the cruelest torture isn't what they do to you, it's what they make you watch them do to the people you love. The phone rang again at 3 a.m. This time, nobody answered. Nobody even moved. They just lay in their beds, listening to it ring and ring and ring, each tone a countdown to something none of them could imagine surviving. Origin 4. The murder. Flashback, 14 years ago. The 24 hours were up. Alex huddled in the back seat of their old Honda as his father drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the Crane Industries chemical plant. His mother had already left for her shift at the hospital. They decided it was safer to split up, harder to target all at once. The plan was simple. His father would clean out his old locker, grab any remaining evidence, and they'd leave Gotham forever. "Stay in the car no matter what," David Thorne said for the 10th time, his hand shaking on the steering wheel. "If anything happens to me, you run straight to the hospital and find your mother. Don't stop for anyone." Alex nodded, clutching his worn comic book. At 11, he still believed in heroes. Still thought maybe Superman would swoop down and save them, or Batman would emerge from the shadows to fight the bad guys. The real world hadn't quite crushed that hope yet. They pulled into the empty parking lot. The chemical plant loomed against the gray sky like a concrete monster, its smokestacks breathing poison into the air where children played. Alex's father sat motionless for a moment, staring at the building where he'd worked for 15 years before they'd destroyed his life for telling the truth. "I love you, Alex," his father said quietly. "No matter what happens, remember that your mother and I love you more than anything in the world." "I love you too, Daddy." David disappeared into the building, leaving Alex alone with his comic book and his growing fear. Minutes ticked by. Then a black sedan pulled into the parking lot, the same car that had been following Alex home from school. 3 men in expensive suits got out. Even at his age, Alex could tell these weren't factory workers. They moved wrong, too smooth and vicious. One of them spoke into a phone, his voice carrying across the empty lot. "Target confirmed. Beginning operation." Alex sank lower in his seat, heart hammering. These men were here for his father. More cars arrived. Black SUVs with tinted windows. Men with earpieces and bulges under their jackets. This wasn't a conversation or a warning. This was an execution squad. The factory's loading dock door opened. His father stumbled out, blood already streaming down his face, clutching a manila envelope against his chest. They'd been waiting for him inside. "Daddy," Alex whispered, pressing his face against the window. "You should have taken the hint, Thorne," called one of the men, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Alex's family made in a month. "I have copies," his father gasped, holding up the envelope. "If anything happens to me, no, you don't." The voice was cultured, familiar from television. Senator Richard Crane stepped into the light, flanked by his security detail. "We've been monitoring your communications for weeks. We know about every copy, every contact, every pathetic attempt to expose us." Alex had seen this man on TV, shaking hands with the mayor, cutting ribbons at charity events, smiling for cameras while promising to protect families like theirs. Now he watched as Crane nodded to his men like he was ordering coffee. "The beautiful thing about owning the media," Crane continued conversationally, "is that we get to write the story. Chemical plant worker suffers a psychotic break, attacks security personnel, and dies in the struggle. Very tragic. Mental illness is such a terrible thing." They surrounded his father in the empty parking lot. 3 against 1, but it might as well have been 30. David Thorne was an engineer, not a fighter. A good man who tried to do the right thing and learned too late that the system was designed to crush people like him. "My son," his father began, "will be found in the car wreckage," Crane said calmly. "Sometimes children die with their parents." Another tragedy for the evening news. Alex pressed his hands over his mouth to keep from screaming. They were going to kill him too. Murder an 11-year-old boy just to cover up their crimes. His father looked directly at the car then, meeting Alex's eyes through the window. Even bleeding, even surrounded by killers, David Thorne managed to mouth 3 words: "Run. Hide. Live." Then they fell on him. Alex watched his father, his kind, loving, hard-working father who had never hurt anyone in his life, get beaten to death in a factory parking lot while a United States senator supervised. Watched good men die while evil men planned their next move. The beating seemed to last forever and no time at all. When it was over, his father lay motionless on the asphalt, blood pooling beneath his head, the envelope scattered in pieces around his body. "Clean this up," Crane ordered. "Make it look convincing. And get the boy." Alex didn't remember making the decision to run. One moment he was frozen in terror, the next he was out of the car and sprinting toward the factory complex. Behind him, he heard shouts, footsteps, and the slam of car doors. "Find him." Crane's voice echoed across the lot. "He can't get far." But Alex knew this place better than they did. His father had brought him here for take your child to work days, showing him the maze of buildings and equipment. Alex might be slow at school, but desperation made him fast, and terror made him clever. He ducked between storage tanks, crawled under conveyor belts, and hid in shadows while flashlight beams swept past. They were hunting him like an animal, and that's exactly what he'd become, a small, frightened creature running for its life. The voices were getting closer. Alex could hear them coordinating, spreading out, and cutting off his escape routes. Soon they'd corner him, and then he stumbled into a loading area filled with chemical drums. Warning signs covered everything: danger, corrosive, toxic, authorized personnel only. There he is. Alex spun around to see 3 men blocking the only exit, their flashlight beams blinding him. He was trapped. "Little Thorne," one of them said, advancing slowly. "Your daddy should have minded his own business." Alex backed away until he felt the edge of something behind him, a maintenance hatch leading to the chemical processing level. His father had shown it to him once, warned him never to go down there, and explained how dangerous the chemicals were. "Please," Alex whispered. "I won't tell anyone. I promise." "You're right," the man said, grabbing Alex by the shirt. "You won't." With casual cruelty, he lifted the 11-year-old boy and hurled him through the open hatch into the chemical darkness below. He fell into darkness, into pipes and machinery and tanks full of things that should never touch human skin. Above him, he heard his father's killers discover the open hatch and heard them argue about whether to follow. "It's a dead end down there," one of them said. "Kid won't last 5 minutes in those chemicals." Problem solved. They walked away, leaving Alex Thorne to die slowly in a chemical nightmare, just another casualty of institutional evil. But Alex Thorne didn't die. He became something else entirely. Something that would remember this night for the rest of its very long, very patient life. Something that would grow strong and smart and absolutely merciless in its pursuit of the people who had murdered a good man for trying to protect children. In the darkness below Crane Industries, surrounded by the very poisons that had been killing his neighbors, Alex Thorne began the transformation that would turn him into their worst nightmare. The boy who had believed in heroes was dead. What crawled out of those chemical tanks would be something far more dangerous than any hero had ever been. Origin 5. The Chemicals. Flashback, 14 years ago. The fall seemed to last forever. Alex plummeted through darkness, his small body bouncing off pipes and machinery before splashing into something that burned like liquid fire. The chemical tank was deeper than he'd expected, over his head even when he found his footing on the bottom. Whatever filled it ate through his clothes in seconds and turned his skin raw and screaming. He surfaced gasping, choking on fumes that made his lungs feel like they were dissolving. The taste was indescribable, metal and acid and something organic that made his stomach heave. Above him, through the open hatch, he could hear his father's killers arguing. Should we check if he's dead? In that soup? The kid's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. Crane Industries Special Cocktail. Byproducts from the Weapons Testing Division. Stuff dissolves bone. Their voices faded as they walked away, leaving Alex alone in the dark with chemicals that were supposed to kill him slowly and horribly. He tried to climb out, but the tank walls were too high and too slick. Every time he got a grip, the chemicals made his hands slip, sending him splashing back into the burning liquid. Time became meaningless. Alex floated in agony, feeling the chemicals work their way through his system. His skin blistered and peeled, then somehow began to heal, then blistered again. His vision blurred, cleared, and shifted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. He should have died in the first 5 minutes. Then the first hour. Then the first day. Instead, something else happened. The chemicals weren't just burning him, they were changing him. Rewriting him at a cellular level, breaking down what he was and rebuilding something new. Alex felt his bones stretch and compress, felt muscles twist into new configurations, and felt his brain firing in patterns that hurt to experience. He was dissolving and reforming, dying and being reborn, over and over in an endless cycle of transformation. The pain was beyond description, like being turned inside out while every nerve in his body screamed. But worse than the physical agony was the mental dissolution. His memories fragmented, scattered, and reformed in new patterns. He remembered his father's murder with perfect clarity now, every word, every gesture, every detail burned into his mind with chemical precision. But he also remembered things that weren't his memories, absorbed from the organic compounds in the chemical soup. Fragments of other victims who had ended up in these tanks, their final moments, their terror, their rage. Days passed. Or weeks. Or months. Time had no meaning in the chemical darkness. Security guards checked the area occasionally, but they never looked in the tanks. Why would they? Nothing could survive in there. But Alex was surviving. More than surviving, he was evolving. His body learned to process the chemicals, to metabolize them, to incorporate them into something new. His skin became resistant to corrosives. His organs adapted to filter toxins. His nervous system rewired itself to handle impossible amounts of sensory input. And his mind grew sharp in ways that 11-year-old Alex Thorne could never have imagined. The slow, struggling child who'd had trouble with basic math suddenly understood complex chemical interactions, molecular structures, and biological systems. The boy who'd been confused by simple concepts now grasped the intricate connections between power, money, corruption, and violence. When he finally climbed out of the tank, weeks later, thinner but somehow stronger, Alex Thorne was no longer entirely human. He was something new, something adaptive, something perfectly designed to hunt the monsters who had created him. He made his way through the abandoned facility, his new senses mapping every chemical signature, every structural weakness, and every security flaw. The place was empty now. Crane Industries had written off this section after the accident and cordoned it off as too dangerous for regular operations. Perfect. Alex found clothing in the security office, food in forgotten storage rooms, and medical supplies in first aid stations. He established himself in the depths of the facility, in places too toxic for normal humans to survive, and began to plan. The first thing he did was practice his new abilities. His body was malleable now, responsive to his will in ways that defied biology. He could stretch, compress, alter his appearance, and even absorb organic material to fuel his transformations. The chemicals had made him into something between human and predator, perfectly adapted for stalking prey that thought itself untouchable. The second thing he did was study. His enhanced mind devoured information, chemistry texts, security manuals, and corporate documents left behind in the evacuation. He learned the bare minimum about how Crane Industries operated, who worked for them, and how they'd covered up his father's murder. Nothing important, but still progress. Local news had reported David Thorne's death exactly as Senator Crane had planned. Chemical plant worker dies in mental health crisis. Alex's own disappearance was blamed on his father's psychotic break. The boy had probably run away in terror and died somewhere in the city. Very tragic. The family was described as unstable and prone to paranoid conspiracy theories. His mother's death came 2 weeks later. Suicide by drug overdose, according to the official report. Grief-stricken nurse unable to cope with family tragedy. In reality, Alex knew they'd probably forced the drugs down her throat to eliminate the last witness to their crime. Sarah Thorne was buried in a pauper's grave while Senator Crane gave speeches about mental health awareness and the importance of supporting troubled families. Alex Thorne was officially dead. His family was officially crazy. Their evidence was officially destroyed. The system had officially protected itself by devouring the people who'd tried to expose its corruption. But in the chemical darkness beneath Crane Industries, something new had been born. Something patient and intelligent and absolutely without mercy. Something that would spend years growing stronger, smarter, and more dangerous, while the men who'd created it forgot he ever existed. They'd tried to dispose of him like toxic waste. Instead, they'd created their own worst nightmare. And when Alex Thorne finally emerged from the shadows to collect the debt they owed, he would do it with abilities they could never have imagined and an intelligence they could never match. The boy who'd believed in heroes was dead, dissolved in chemical fire. What remained was something far more terrible and far more effective. Something that would never again make the mistake of trusting in justice, mercy, or the goodness of mankind. Something that would become justice itself, cruel, patient, and absolutely final. Note, Alex Thorne is officially dead, but somehow, his identity still exists in the story. How? His tragic backstory makes him the perfect suspect in case the Batman does a background check. Chapter 20. Encounter. Abandoned Star City subway tunnels. Alex pressed his palm against the cold concrete wall, studying the photographs and documents spread across its surface like a spider's web of corruption. Each image told a story of betrayal. Each file represented a child who'd been failed by the system meant to protect them. 30 years of Captain Hayden's blackmail material. Danny's social circle of wealthy predators. Every dirty secret, every buried crime, all of it pulled straight from their dying minds. Batman's fancy computers could only scrape the surface. Detective Reynolds, Judge Morrison, and Federal Prosecutor Davidson. The obvious players, the ones sloppy enough to leave digital breadcrumbs. But Alex had access to something Batman's technology could never reach: the raw, unfiltered memories of the dead. His fingers traced the edge of a photograph. Councilman Peter Voss, he whispered to the empty tunnel. The man looked so ordinary, so forgettable. Just another middle-aged bureaucrat with thinning hair and tired eyes. Takes envelopes full of cash to rezone buildings for trafficking. Told his wife it was consulting fees. Bought his daughter's BMW with blood money. The next photo showed a woman in a white coat, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Elena Vasquez. Child psychologist. Writes false reports to help monsters get custody of their victims. Justified it as family reunification. Collected bonuses for every case closed. The final image was almost pathetic, a janitor mopping floors, invisible to everyone around him. Carl Morgan. Judge Morgan's brother. Plants evidence, destroys grape kits, and steals witness statements. Not for threats, for gambling debts. Sold justice for poker chips. These three were connected to the major players but completely off Batman's radar. They were small fish who'd made themselves useful to bigger predators. Perfect for what Alex had planned. 3 cocoons hung from the tunnel ceiling like grotesque fruit, each one pulsing with organic rhythms. Inside, these minor criminals floated in biofluid while Alex's tendrils wormed through their spinal columns, threading living circuitry through their nervous systems. Their minds remained intact. Alex wanted them aware for what was coming. "Time to wake up," he said softly. Peter Voss jerked awake inside his cocoon, panic flooding his system as he felt something foreign moving through his body like electric wires made of flesh. Oh God, no." His voice came out as a strangled whisper. "Something's inside me. I can feel it crawling through my veins. It's in my brain. It's in my brain. Hello, Peter." Alex's voice seemed to echo from inside Voss's own skull. "You can feel me moving through your nervous system, can't you? Like spider silk made of meat." Dr. Vasquez's cocoon dissolved around her, her body jerking upright despite her frantic attempts to collapse. The walls are breathing. Why are the walls breathing? This isn't real. This can't be real. Bodies don't work like this. But they do now, Elena. Alex's presence slithered through her thoughts. "I can taste your memories. All those children you handed over. You told yourself they'd be better off with their biological fathers. But you knew. You always knew what those men were." Carl Morgan's cocoon split open last, the old janitor's eyes rolling back to show only whites before snapping forward. "My fingers. I can't feel my fingers. They're moving but I can't feel them. Someone else is wearing my hands. What is happening?" Carl. Alex's voice was almost gentle. 67 cases. That's a lot of evidence to destroy for gambling money. Did you ever wonder what happened to those people while you were feeding slots at the casino? Please. Voss whimpered, tears streaming down his face. "My daughter. She doesn't know what I did. She thinks Daddy helps the city. Don't let her see me like this." Too late for that, Voss. The Trap Springs. Star City Industrial District. Green Arrow balanced on the warehouse edge, watching Federal Prosecutor Davidson's sedan roll into the empty lot below. "Eyes on target," Oliver murmured into his comm. "Davidson's here." "Copy that." Morgan's at the courthouse, Reynolds moving toward the docks. Batman's voice crackled through static. "Remember, we need the killer alive. These scumbags are secondary." Through his scope, Oliver watched Davidson climb out of his car and check his expensive watch with obvious irritation. Then another figure stepped out of the shadows, a middle-aged guy in a councilman's suit, but something was wrong with how he moved. Too stiff. Too mechanical. "Batman, Davidson's got company. Unknown male, appears to be having some kind of neurological episode. Can you ID him?" Oliver adjusted his scope, zeroing in on the stranger's face. The Mun was crying, not just teary-eyed, but full-body sobbing with absolute terror while his body moved forward. His mouth was moving constantly, whispering something over and over. "This is Councilman Peter Voss." The Mun suddenly screamed toward the rooftop, somehow knowing exactly where Oliver was hiding. "There's something controlling my body. It's making me walk but I'm not walking. My legs aren't mine anymore. Help me, somebody, anybody." A chill ran down Oliver's spine. "Batman, we've got a major problem here." "Mr. Davidson," Peter Voss's mouth said in a calm, analytical voice while his eyes rolled frantically in their sockets. "Thanks for coming out so late." Davidson turned, his vulgar smile dying when he saw Voss's face, mouth speaking normally while tears poured down his cheeks like he was watching his own funeral. "Peter? The hell's wrong with your face, Mun?" "It's not me." Voss screamed, his voice layering over itself as if two people were speaking through the same throat. "There's something inside my head making words with my mouth. I can hear myself talking but I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything." But his body kept walking forward like a broken puppet, one foot in front of the other like a wind-up toy. "The puppet strings are made of nerve endings," Voss whispered, his voice taking on a sing-song quality. Cut the strings and the puppet bleeds. Cut the puppet and the strings, remember. Peter takes bribes, his mouth said in Alex's cold voice while Voss's own voice sobbed in the background. Not for his family. Not under threat. For greed. He bought his daughter's love with money soaked in people's tears. Davidson stepped back, suddenly alert to danger. What kind of sick joke is this? Above them, Green Arrow tensed, arrow knocked but unable to find a clear target. The councilman was definitely under external control, but his terror was absolutely real. I liked the money, Voss whispered in his own voice, the words coming out in a broken cadence. I liked buying things. I liked being important. I told myself it was just buildings. Just empty buildings. But I knew. I always knew what they were for. No. Voss screamed suddenly. That's not, I mean yes, but please don't make me say it. Don't make me tell the truth. Davidson pulled his concealed pistol, but Voss's body moved with inhuman speed. Organic weapons erupted from the councilman's spine, bone spears, chitinous blades, and writhing tentacles of living tissue. It's growing out of me. Voss shrieked as claws sprouted from his fingertips. I can feel it pushing through my skin. Help! Something's coming out. The courthouse. 12:18 a.m. Gotham City. Batman crouched in the shadows, watching Judge Morgan swagger through his private courthouse entrance like he owned the building. The corrupt judge moved with casual arrogance, completely unaware he was walking into a trap. A second figure emerged from the darkness, a woman in a doctor's coat, but she moved wrong. Same jerky, puppet-like gait Oliver had described over the calm her lips were moving constantly, like she was praying or reciting something. This is Batman, he spoke into his comm confirming external neurological control of unknown subject. Possibly some form of la, 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 the woman suddenly sang upward, her voice melodic and broken. Can you see the strings? They're made of blood and electricity. They're humming lullabies to my spinal cord. Batman's blood went cold. This wasn't the architect, this was another victim. My name used to be Dr. Elena Vasquez, she continued in a childlike voice. But names don't matter when someone else is driving. I'm just a passenger in my own skull now. Watching through windows I can't close. Then her voice changed completely, becoming cold and analytical. Elena falsifies psychological reports. Not for blackmail. For money. 2,000 per false report. She bought a beach house with the price of children suffering. Yes, but, Judge Morgan stammered, suddenly realizing he was in serious danger. I told myself they belonged with their fathers, Vasquez whispered in her own voice, the words coming out like a confession. Biological parents, right? That's what's best for children. Except I knew. I could see the fear in their eyes during evaluations. But the money was so good. So very good. Stop making me remember, she screamed suddenly. Those memories aren't for sharing. They're mine. My private shame. Her spine erupted with bone weapons, but her litany of whispered confessions never stopped. 43 children. 43 little faces. I remember all their names. I remember all their names. The docks. 12:20 a.m. Star City Harbor. Detective Reynolds met his contact at Pier 47, the same spot where he'd helped dispose of evidence from dozens of sexual assault cases. Fog rolled off the harbor, muffling sounds and turning the world into a gray nightmare. His contact stepped out of the mist, an elderly man in a janitor's uniform, but he was humming a children's lullaby over and over, while tears streamed down his face. Hush, little baby, don't say a word, the man sang softly. Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird. Detective Reynolds, the evidence is all burned away. Reynolds drew his service weapon, suddenly very alert. Who the hell are you, old man? My name was Carl Morgan, the janitor said, his voice switching between singing and sobbing. But names are just sounds when you're not the one making them. I'm Judge Morgan's brother, but brothers don't matter when your puppet show meet. I can feel the strings, Carl whispered, his voice becoming conspiratorial. "They're not really strings. They're alive. They whisper to my bones and tell them how to dance." Carl destroys evidence. A different voice spoke through his mouth. Cold, analytical, inhuman. "Not for family. Not for threats. For gambling debts. He sold people's justice for poker chips and slot machines." "I liked the rush," Carl whispered in his own voice, still humming between words. "The cards, the dice, the spinning wheels. I told myself it was just paperwork. Just files. But files have names. Files have faces. 67 little faces watching me feed them to the shredder." His hands sprouted organic claws, but he kept humming the lullaby. "The house always wins. The house always wins. But what did I win? What did I win?" All 3 locations. At the warehouse, Peter Voss's body systematically tore Davidson apart while Voss sang, "Ring around the rosy, pockets full of money, slaughter, slaughter, we all fall down." At the courthouse, Dr. Vasquez's claws shredded Judge Morgan while she recited, 43 names, 43 faces, 43 prices paid for false embraces. At the docks, Carl Morgan's bone spears pierced Detective Reynolds while the old man hummed, "Hush little baby, don't you cry, 67 reasons why justice had to die." Batman and Green Arrow moved simultaneously, rappelling down to their respective scenes of carnage. All 3 puppets spoke simultaneously in Alex's voice. Batman. "Green Arrow. Meet my marionettes. They're telling the truth now, something they never did while they were free." Peter loved his greed. Elena loved her money. Carl loved his gambling. No threats. No blackmail. Just human weakness wearing a price tag. "I tasted their memories," Alex continued through all 3 voices. "Savored every rationalization, every justification. They convinced themselves they were victims while counting blood money. Now they're honest for the first time in their lives." The 3 controlled bodies began convulsing as organic material built within their torsos, but their singing and confessing never stopped. "You can't save them," Alex said matter-of-factly. "But you can listen to them sing their sins before they die. They're finally telling the truth about what they chose to become." Green Arrow reached the warehouse first. Arrow knocked but unable to target Peter Voss. Despite everything, the Mun was still a victim. "My daughter," Voss sang, looking directly at Oliver while his body began to glow with building biomass energy. "Daddy's little princess. I bought her love with dirty money. I am the monster under her bed." Biological explosive detected. Batman's voice crackled through the comm all 3 sites. "I can't shoot them," Oliver said, his voice strained with horror. "They're still people. Broken people. Incoming." Batman shouted as all 3 bodies began to expand. "Clear the area." The 3 locations erupted simultaneously in blasts of organic fire and bone shrapnel. Green Arrow's grappling line yanked him clear as the warehouse collapsed, but Peter Voss's final song echoed through the explosion. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Blood money shining, guilt defining, Daddy's princess falls so far." Batman's cape shielded him from the courthouse blast, but Dr. Vasquez's numbered confessions would haunt his dreams. 43, 43, 43. When the smoke cleared, both the corrupt officials and their unwilling killers were dead, their remains arranged in perfect broken scale formations, Alex's calling card written in blood and bone. Only Alex's voice remained, echoing from hidden speakers near each blast site. No threats. No blackmail. No coercion. Just human greed dressed up as necessity. They chose their corruption and called it survival. I simply made them honest about their choices. Refusing to kill the devil doesn't make you saints or heroes. It makes you his enabler. To the dead, your rules are just stories whispered in empty graves. The scales of justice are broken. I am the balance. Batman pulled himself from the rubble, blood trickling down his cowl. Oliver, status report. I'm breathing. Green Arrow's voice was hollow and shaken. But Bruce, they were singing. Even while dying, They were singing children's songs. What kind of monster makes people sing while they die? The kind that understands psychological warfare better than we do, Batman said grimly, staring at the smoking courthouse ruins. He's not just killing criminals, he's making them confess their sins while wearing their guilt like carnival masks. In the silence that followed, both heroes realized they weren't just hunting a killer anymore. They were facing someone who could turn corruption itself into a weapon, someone who understood that the most horrifying truth was often the simplest one. People chose to be monsters because it paid well. And somewhere in Star City's shadows, Alex smiled as he felt their psychological profiles updating in his consciousness. The real war was just beginning, and the heroes were already humming his tune. Chapter 21, Aftermath. The Watchtower. 6 a.m. Justice League headquarters. The holographic corpses rotated slowly in the sterile light of the briefing room, their faces frozen in final screams. Superman's knuckles had gone white where he gripped the edge of the table, the metal groaning under pressure that could crush mountains. 6 dead. 3 puppets. All dancing to his tune while they begged us to save them. His voice carried the weight of granite, each word carved from barely restrained fury. Batman stood in shadow, as always, but the exhaustion bleeding from his posture spoke louder than words ever could. Dark circles had hollowed his eyes into pits. Enhanced metamorphic capabilities. Complete neurological domination. Memory extraction through consumption of neural tissue. Wonder Woman's jaw worked like she was chewing glass. I've seen the horrors of war across millennia. But watching those people scream while their own hands carved up people. She left the sentence hanging like a noose. Green Arrow slumped in his chair, aging a decade in the space of heartbeats. They knew. Every second of it. They felt their fingers cutting flesh, couldn't stop themselves from killing them. They could hear themselves begging for mercy while their mouths spoke his words. The Flash had stopped vibrating entirely, a sure sign of how deeply the horror had cut. How do you fight something that turns every civilian into a potential weapon? Every person we save could be the next bomb he sets off. Cyborg's voice carried digital distortion, with static creeping in like infection. 3 targets eliminated. None appeared in any database we maintain. Ghost profiles, criminals who existed in the shadows between our surveillance nets. He ate their minds, Superman said, the words tasting like ash. Every memory Hayden possessed, every dirty secret, every connection to the rot underneath Star City. It's all rattling around in that thing's skull now. Batman nodded once, sharp as a blade. The controlled subjects weren't random. Mid-tier operators in Hayden's network. Guilty enough to deserve punishment, but still humans to make us hesitate. It's a tactic of the mind, Wonder Woman observed, her warrior's mind recognizing the tactics. Forcing us to watch collaborators butchered by other collaborators. Make us complicit in their destruction through our inability to act. The silence stretched taut as piano wire. He studied us, Green Arrow said finally, his voice cracking. Knew exactly where we'd be positioned. How long our response times would take. Which of us would arrive first. He laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. We could be as predictable as clockwork to him. Should be the absorbed tactical data from criminals who faced us, Batman said. Psychological profiles that could have been built from years of analysis. Our weaknesses might be already mapped and cataloged. The implication settled over them like a burial shroud. He doesn't just know our methods, Superman said. He knows our souls. Which is why last night went exactly as he planned, Wonder Woman added grimly. Cyborg screens flickered with the sickly light of bad news. Criminal networks in both cities are hemorrhaging personnel. Safe houses abandoned. Assets liquidated in panic. Terror, Batman said. The word is spreading through the underworld like plague. The architect has become the monster that monsters fear. Panicked criminals don't think clearly, Green Arrow said. They make mistakes, leave trails. Or exactly what he wants, Superman countered. Drive them deeper underground where legal channels can't reach them. Force them into his hunting ground. The Flash finally spoke, his voice hollow. So what's our play? We become unpredictable, Superman said, though the words felt like lies in his mouth. Find approaches his stolen knowledge can't account for. And preserve what's left of our principles, Wonder Woman added. The moment we sacrifice our souls to stop him, we become him. Batman pulled shadows around himself like armor. I suspect he doesn't want us dead. Death would be mercy. He wants us broken. Wants to prove that heroes are just another species of monster waiting for the right pressure. Then we don't give him that satisfaction, Superman said, though his voice carried less conviction than before. As the League prepared to disperse, Green Arrow caught Batman's arm. Bruce. What he made us watch last night, how much more of this can you take? Batman's jaw could have cut diamond. He turned human beings into marionettes and made us watch them dance. Made victims into executioners. A pause that lasted lifetimes. I'm past taking, Oliver. Now I'm calculating. Don't let him poison you. Too late for that, Batman said, stepping back into darkness. But I'll use that poison to kill him. Gotham Community College. 8:30 a.m. Alex sat in the lecture hall shadows, his pen moving across paper in patterns that had nothing to do with note-taking. Around him, soft-faced children debated ethics they'd never truly tested, moral frameworks that would crumble at first contact with real consequence. Professor Martha droned about criminological theory, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd studied monsters but never met one. The cycle of victimization often creates perpetrators who rationalize their actions through trauma narratives. Marcus, eager, naive Marcus, raised his hand like a good little student. But what about vigilantes? People who break established law to serve higher justice. Complex territory, Professor Martha replied, warming to her favorite subject. Vigilantism typically emerges from perceived institutional failure. When the entire system for justice breaks down, individuals take justice into their own hands. Alex smiled without moving his lips, continuing his sketches. Psychological profiles bloomed across the page: Batman's guilt complex, Superman's messiah delusion, and Wonder Woman's warrior's pride. Clues mapped out in careful detail, available weaknesses catalogued like specimens in jars. His phone buzzed with mundane concerns: study group scheduling, weekend plans, the small social obligations that made Alex Thorne real. The perfect cover, hiding in plain sight among these children who played at understanding darkness while true predators walked among them. Class ended with the usual shuffle of books and bags. Alex flowed with the crowd, another unremarkable face in an ocean of mediocrity. Tomorrow he'd return, playing his role with method actor precision. But tonight belonged to research. Hayden's consumed memories had revealed such interesting connections: corrupt officials, protected predators, failures that demanded correction. The architect's work had barely begun. Star City, Maria's apartment. 9:15 a.m. Maria Santos woke from nightmares that felt different somehow, less immediate, more distant. The phantom weight of Danny Hayden's hands had finally lifted from her throat, though she couldn't say when or how. For weeks, sleep had been a battlefield where her subconscious replayed every violation, every threat, every moment of helpless terror. But last night, she'd managed 4 hours of unbroken rest. Something had shifted in the world's weight. She moved through her morning routine with cautious hope, checking locks with less desperation, and answering her phone without flinching. The persistent dread that had colonized her chest was not gone, but diminished. As if some poisonous presence had been surgically removed from her life. Maria didn't know that Danny Hayden's body lay in pieces in a Gotham warehouse, arranged in mocking scales of justice. Didn't know that the corruption network protecting him had been systematically dismantled. Didn't know that somewhere in the darkness, a monster had devoured other monsters on her behalf. All she knew was that the fear choking her for months had finally loosened its grip. She made coffee without shaking. Opened her door without checking the peephole 5 times. Breathed without feeling like her lungs were full of broken glass. Justice had found Danny Hayden in the end, not through courts or law, but through something far more permanent. And while Maria would never know the details, she could finally begin the long process of healing. Some victories came wrapped in shadows, their saviors remaining forever unknown. The Watchtower, later. 11 a.m. The organic residue analysis? Superman's question hung in recycled air that tasted of metal and growing desperation. Designed to decay, Cyborg reported, his voice carrying mechanical exhaustion. Cellular breakdown accelerated beyond natural parameters. Whatever tissue samples we recovered, they were meant to be destroyed. Back to hunting ghosts, the Flash said, slumping in his chair like a marionette with cut strings. Not entirely. Batman studied crime scene photographs with the intensity of a man reading his own death warrant. He's methodical, patient. His goal and extent of his actions are now clear to us. His every action serves a larger strategic purpose. What kind of strategy? Wonder Woman asked, though something in her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. His attacks till now have all been against corruption and the broken system. He judges the monsters hiding behind law and order. Superman nodded grimly, understanding blooming like infection. Then we're not dealing with a serial killer. No, Batman confirmed. We're dealing with a revolutionary. And revolution always demands sacrifice. Green Arrow stared at the photographs of last night's victims, puppets dancing to an inhuman tune while their consciousness screamed in trapped skulls. How many more will die before we find a way to stop him? The silence that followed had weight and texture, pressing down on them like earth on coffins. Chapter 22. Campus Celebrity. Blackgate Penitentiary. The gavel's fall echoed like a skull cracking against stone. Victor Zash, by order of the Gotham Supreme Court, your death sentence has been commuted to life imprisonment pending psychiatric evaluation. Zash remained motionless in his orange jumpsuit, a scarred mannequin counting ceiling tiles with the look of someone with nothing else to do. 43 across, 27 down. 1,161 total, each tile reminding him of the lives he'd carved from existence. Mr. Zash, Judge leaned forward, his voice carrying the false authority of someone who'd never truly stared into the abyss. Do you understand what this means? Zash's head tilted down slowly, his face splitting into something that might have been a smile if smiles could hold such perfect emptiness. It means the game continues, Your Honor. Death would have been inconvenient. The public defender, some idealistic fool still believing in redemption, looked like he was swallowing bile. The prosecutor hurled his files down with the impotent rage of justice denied. But Zash simply smiled, tracing the fresh scar on his forearm with reverent fingers. 3 days prior, he'd carved it with a sharpened toothbrush after strangling his cellmate into merciful silence. The guards had discovered the corpse arranged in a prayer position, peaceful as absolution itself. Zash had gifted him transcendence. Remove the defendant, Judge commanded, but Zash was already rising gracefully, the movement of something that had transcended human limitations through perfect communion with violence. He just took a life and now he walks free, hiding behind the mask of temporary insanity. As in not getting the rope. As bailiffs moved to escort him, his gaze found a woman in the gallery's shadows. Middle-aged, clutching a photograph like a religious relic. The mother of another victim. The numbers had lost meaning long ago. Mascara carved black rivers down her cheeks, tears for wounds that would never heal. Zash gifted her a wink of pure understanding. She would remember that wink in her nightmares until the day she died. Days later, Gotham University Psychology Department. The faculty mixer reeked of cheap wine and academic desperation. Alex arrived precisely 20 minutes late, early enough to seem engaged, late enough to make an entrance. His thesis notes provided perfect camouflage among the intellectual peacocks grooming for tenure and recognition. The lecture hall buzzed with the hollow energy of minds that studied monsters without ever meeting one. Professors networked over plastic cups of wine, graduate students performed elaborate submission rituals, and undergraduates circled like scavengers hoping for scraps of academic credibility. Alex. Dr. Rebecca came beside him, wine already loosening her professional mask. Perfect timing. I was just explaining your upcoming presentation to everyone who'll listen. Just pursuing knowledge, Alex replied, accepting a cup of wine. He surveyed the room with patience, memorizing weaknesses and mapping social hierarchies. Professor Martha was 3 drinks deep, cornering some undergraduate with her rat maze obsession, small minds studying smaller minds. "Someone I want you to meet," Rebecca said, guiding him toward familiar blonde hair. "Though I suspect you two have already encountered each other." Stephanie Brown turned as they approached, raising her wine cup in a greeting that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Alex, how's the new thesis progressing?" "Like archaeology, slow excavation of buried truths," he replied. They'd shared multiple classes, and she'd proven sharper than most. Always asking questions that cut beneath surface assumptions. "Your criminology project?" "Actually, perfect timing." A dark-haired figure joined their conversation, extending his hand casually. "Tim Drake. We share advanced abnormal psych, 3rd row, left side." Alex accepted the handshake, placing the face among his mental files. A quiet observer and meticulous note-taker, asked probing questions about criminal pathology with sophistication. "Pre-med track, correct?" "Eventually. Current focus is forensic psychology." Tim's eyes held a kind of analytical depth that seemed unusual for his age. "Stephanie and I are collaborating on a project about violent offender recidivism. We thought you might provide insights." "Fancy term for repeat offending, what manner of insights?" Alex asked, though anticipation was already blooming in his chest. Stephanie lowered her voice. "We've been examining the Victor Zash case. His sentence commutation a few days ago, the psychiatric evaluations claiming rehabilitation potential, likelihood of re-offense patterns." Alex felt familiar electricity coursing through his veins. They were asking him to profile a killer he was already stalking. The irony was intoxicating, like being asked to critique your own masterpiece while wearing someone else's face. "Zash presents fascinating pathology," Alex said carefully. "What's your specific analytical angle?" "Whether the judiciary made a catastrophic error," Tim replied. "Psychiatric reports claimed meaningful progress, evidence of potential rehabilitation. But his behavioral patterns suggest complete impossibility of redemption," Alex finished, warming to the performance. "The commutation was worse than a mistake, it was willful blindness. Zash doesn't kill from trauma or any of his psychotic breaks. He kills because he's achieved perfect philosophical clarity about existence's fundamental meaninglessness." A crowd began gathering around their conversation like moths drawn to flame. Dr. Rebecca practically glowed with pride as students and faculty pressed closer, hungry for expertise none of them possessed. "Surely," Professor Martha wandered over, swaying with alcoholic confidence, "rehabilitation potential exists for every human being? That's the foundational principle of our entire justice system." Alex smiled with the patience of someone explaining color to the blind. "That's the comforting delusion we use to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths, Professor. Some individuals are damaged beyond any possibility of repair. Zash began killing at 12, neighborhood cats first, naturally progressing to human subjects. Each scar carved into his flesh represents a life he's liberated from existence. Do you genuinely believe therapy sessions will cure that level of philosophical commitment?" "You speak like someone with intimate knowledge of his methodology," Tim said. "Case files, police reports, crime scene photographs," Alex replied smoothly, truth serving as perfect camouflage. "I've been researching him lately for my thesis. Kill patterns, signature behaviors, body arrangement techniques, everything matches his philosophy about existence's inherent emptiness." "If he resumes killing," Stephanie pressed, "what would you predict?" The room had achieved perfect silence, hanging on Alex's every word like parishioners awaiting revelation. This was how reputation was built, not through deception, but through genuine expertise that transcended everyone else's understanding. "Escalation beyond previous parameters," Alex said with prophetic certainty. Prison didn't diminish his compulsion at all, it compressed it into some kind of concentrated obsession. He'll feel outdated, like his opportunities for artistic expression were stolen. The kills will be more elaborate and more philosophically sophisticated. He'll compensate for his lost time through accelerated demonstration of his core beliefs. Christ, someone whispered from the crowd's periphery. Such certainty, Dr. Kellerman materialized at the group's edge, the department head studying Alex with new interest. How can you be so confident in these predictions? Understanding requires temporary psychological fusion, Alex replied, each word precisely calculated. To predict a killer's behavior, you must achieve momentary unity with their thought processes. The moment you impose normal moral frameworks on abnormal psychology, analytical objectivity dies. Have you considered law enforcement consultation? Kellerman asked. GCPD desperately needs someone with your level of insight. I've contemplated it, Alex said. Though I worry about maintaining my academics if I become too deeply involved in active investigations. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, the academic crowd hanging on Alex's every insight about criminal psychology. He was building exactly the reputation he needed, the brilliant student who understood monsters better than anyone else in the room. Then the television mounted in the corner caught someone's attention. Wait, turn that up, a graduate student called out, pointing at the screen. Professor Martha fumbled for the remote, the room's chatter dying as the local news anchor's grave face filled the display. Her voice cut through the academic atmosphere like a blade through butter. Breaking news this evening. Convicted serial killer Victor Zash has escaped from Blackgate Penitentiary during what was supposed to be a routine psychiatric consultation. The escape occurred at approximately 3:20 p.m. when Zash overpowered two guards and fled through a service entrance. The lecture hall erupted into shocked murmurs and gasps. Holy shit, someone whispered. We were literally just talking about him. Stephanie had gone pale, her wine cup trembling in her hands. This is exactly what you were predicting, Alex. The escalation, the timing, Jesus Christ, Dr. Rebecca breathed, setting down her wine with shaking hands. He's been free for hours. He could be anywhere in the city by now. Tim's analytical mask had slipped completely, revealing something that looked almost like recognition mixed with suspicion. His eyes fixed on Alex with uncomfortable intensity. Your predictions about his behavior patterns, they were remarkably specific. Academic analysis based on case studies, Alex replied smoothly. Unfortunately, criminal psychology often proves depressingly predictable. Considered extremely dangerous, the anchor continued. GCPD has issued a citywide alert. Citizens are advised to remain indoors and report any suspicious activity immediately. Zash is recognizable by the extensive scarification covering his arms and torso. Everyone needs to leave immediately, Dr. Kellerman announced, his earlier warmth replaced by cold authority. Campus security will escort people to their vehicles. Nobody walks alone tonight. The room began emptying rapidly, conversations replaced by nervous energy and hurried movement. Alex helped Dr. Rebecca gather scattered papers across the room. Your talk show next week, she said, hands still trembling. Should we postpone it? With a killer loose in the city, absolutely not, Alex replied with quiet conviction. If anything, recent events make understanding criminal psychology more vital than ever. The university shouldn't surrender to fear. Near the exit, Tim and Stephanie lingered in hushed conversation, occasionally glancing in Alex's direction. Their words were too quiet to overhear, but their body language screamed suspicion. Told you something felt off about his insights, way he described the methodology, like he'd studied it firsthand, should probably contact. They fell silent as Alex approached, casual mask snapping back into place with practiced ease. You two need an escort to your vehicles? Alex asked with friendly concern. We parked together, Tim replied, his voice carefully neutral. Thanks though. You should be careful yourself. If your analysis is correct about his escalation patterns, tonight could be very dangerous for everyone in Gotham. There was an undertone to Tim's words that Alex didn't quite like, but he maintained his facade of academic concern. I'm sure GCPD will apprehend him quickly. Zash may be intelligent, but he's also compulsive. That combination rarely allows for long-term evasion. As security guards began escorting the remaining faculty and students from the building, Alex felt his phone buzz. Unknown number. Package delivered. EW ready for consultation. He deleted the message and smiled into the chaos around him. Emma Walsh had received her black envelope, and now Victor Zash was free to play his part in the grand design. The timing was exquisite, almost as if fate itself was orchestrating their collision. As the gathering wound down, Alex assisted Dr. Rebecca with a final cleanup while campus security waited impatiently by the exits. "You were absolutely magnetic tonight," she said, though her earlier enthusiasm was now tempered by genuine fear. "Even before the news. Did you see how captivated everyone became? That's natural teaching ability." "Simply sharing accumulated knowledge," Alex replied, though internally he was calculating reputation dividends. Each public appearance reinforced his credibility. Soon he'd be too valuable to question, too respected to suspect. Walking across campus under heavy security escort, Alex felt the familiar thrill of the hunt beginning. While everyone else radiated fear about Zash's escape, he experienced only anticipation. Later, the underground. Alex descended through shadows into Gotham's forgotten arteries, where the city's original infrastructure rotted beneath modern facades. His footsteps echoed against brick walls that had witnessed a century of secrets, down tunnels that connected to maintenance shafts, storm drains, and the abandoned subway system that honeycombed beneath the metropolis. The laboratory he'd constructed occupied a forgotten maintenance chamber, accessed through service tunnels that appeared on no current city maps. Generator power, sophisticated equipment acquired through careful purchases across multiple identities, everything needed for his true research. The examination table held his latest acquisition, Victor Zash's psychiatric evaluation files, acquired through methods that would horrify his university colleagues. Photos of the killer's scars, detailed behavioral analysis, and interview transcripts where Zash had performed sanity for gullible doctors. But Alex needed more than academic data. He needed to understand Zash's fundamental drives, his core motivations, and the philosophical framework that justified his actions. Only then could he demonstrate superior methodology. Alex reviewed the killer's known locations, the halfway house where he was required to reside, the therapy sessions he attended with theatrical compliance, and the walking routes he took through neighborhoods filled with potential victims. Zash believed he was the perfect predator, evolution's answer to human weakness. He would learn otherwise. Now all that's left is for him to resurface. For that, he has prepared bait, something he believes Zash would never refuse. Just a few more days, and his plans will be set in motion. In the darkness above, Gotham slept fitfully, unaware that its newest monster was preparing to school one of its oldest in the true meaning of violence. The student would become the teacher. The hunter would become the hunted. And Victor Zash would discover what it meant to be prey. Chapter 23. The Artist's Return. The warehouse reeked of death and something far worse, the sweet stench of rotting hope. Victor Zash walked through his private gallery like a proud curator, his scarred fingers trailing along rusted metal tables where dried blood had formed abstract patterns. "Perfect symmetry," he whispered to the darkness, his voice echoing off concrete walls that had absorbed too many screams. 7 corpses hung from industrial chains in a perfect circle, each one positioned to represent the lies humans told themselves to make life bearable. The businessman still clutched his briefcase in a death grip. Ambition, Zash had labeled him with a handwritten placard. The elderly woman's rosary beads were wound tight around her throat. Faith. The young mother's wedding ring caught what little light filtered through boarded windows. Love. But his masterpiece hung in the center of it all. Jenny White, 23 years old, a kindergarten teacher, arms spread wide like she was embracing death itself. Children's drawings formed a sick halo around her head, stick figures holding hands, crayon hearts, and smiling suns with yellow rays. The innocent artwork created a contrast so obscene it would haunt whoever found her for the rest of their lives. "The children drew you wings," Zash had told her on day 2, holding up a picture of an angel with purple crayon wings. "How prophetic. Though I suppose you'll be flying somewhere different than they imagined." She'd been conscious then, tears streaming down her face as she begged him to let her go back to her students. That's when he knew she was perfect. Her love for those children made her suffering so much more meaningful. He'd kept her alive for 4 days, not for torture, but for completion. Each day had a purpose. Day 1 was positioning, finding the exact center point and calculating the precise angles. Day 2 was adding the children's artwork, each drawing carefully selected from her bag to tell the story he wanted. Day 3 was arranging personal items from each victim: wedding rings, crosses, business cards, all the little totems people clung to. Day 4 was the final arrangement, where individual deaths became part of a greater truth about human delusion. His phone buzzed against his thigh. A breaking news alert. Manhunt continues. Serial killer Victor Zash remains at large. Police urge extreme caution. Do not approach if spotted. Call 911 immediately. Zash laughed, his hoarse voice echoing in the empty warehouse. He swiped away the notification and shook his head. Poor Dr. Hartwell, probably cowering in his office right about now, realizing his prized patient had been feeding him lies for months. All those sessions about finding peace through meditation and channeling violent urges into art therapy. What a joke. The good doctor had actually believed someone like him could be tamed with breathing exercises and finger painting. He'd given them exactly what they wanted to hear: guilt, remorse, and a broken man struggling to rebuild his life. They ate it up because they needed to believe in redemption. It validated their pathetic profession. And when the death penalty came knocking, a few tears about childhood trauma and some manufactured breakthrough about seeing the light. This works every time to escape the death sentence. The bleeding hearts couldn't help themselves. Now here he was, free as a bird while they scrambled to explain how Victor Zash had slipped through their fingers. Again. Something groaned from the corner, pulling Zash from his thoughts. On the floor beside his workbench, fresh tools lay arranged in perfect rows, scalpel still in sterile packaging, bone saws with sharp teeth, and needles that gleamed like silver stars. The homeless veteran named Marcus was finally waking up from the tranquilizer, his body jerking against the zip ties that held him to a support beam. "Morning, sunshine," Zash said, crouching down beside the mun. Marcus's eyes focused slowly, then went wide with pure animal terror when he saw the scarred face leaning over him. His whole body went rigid, every muscle screaming to run while his mind processed the nightmare he'd stumbled into. A muffled scream died behind the duct tape covering his mouth, and Zash could smell the sharp scent of urine as the mun lost control of his bladder. "No screaming yet," Zash whispered, pressing a finger to his lips like he was shushing a crying child. "We haven't even started the introduction. I want you to appreciate the full experience." He gestured around the warehouse like a tour guide showing off a museum exhibit. "Welcome to my studio, Marcus. This is where I create truth. Each piece tells a story about the beautiful lies humans tell themselves and the even more beautiful honesty of death." Marcus tried desperately to speak through the gag, spittle running down his chin as his eyes darted between the hanging corpses and Zash's calm, dead expression. The killer tilted his head, studying his newest subject like a scientist examining a fascinating specimen. "You want to know why you're here?" Zash asked, his voice soft and conversational. "You're here because you're absolutely perfect. Society already threw you away, homeless veteran, probably PTSD, definitely an alcoholic. When you disappear, maybe one overworked social worker will file a missing person report. Maybe. But probably not. No one cares about discarded meat, Marcus. Except me. I see you for what you really are." He picked up a scalpel, removing it from its sterile packaging with the reverence of a priest handling communion wine. "I see the real you, the death pretending to be life, the ending pretending to be a story. And I'm going to help you stop pretending." The first cut was always ceremonial, a small incision across the cheek, just deep enough to draw blood but shallow enough to keep the subject conscious. Marcus screamed into his gag, the sound muffled but still music to Zash's ears. The killer closed his eyes and listened to that perfect note of anguish, then calmly carved another mark into his own forearm. One more tally for his collection, one more truth revealed. "Now we begin the real work," he whispered, reaching for the bone saw. 2 hours later, Zash stepped back to admire his latest creation. Marcus hung beside Jessica now, positioned to create perfect visual balance in the composition. His body had been arranged to represent hope, the cruelest lie of all, the one that kept people clinging to life long after it had any meaning. The warehouse was quiet except for the gentle creaking of chains swaying in the air and the steady drip of blood hitting concrete. He walked to the far wall, where a collage of newspaper clippings covered the rusted metal like wallpaper made of nightmares. Headlines screaming about the architect killings, opinion pieces about vigilante justice, and crime scene photos that showed work so inferior it was almost embarrassing. His so-called competition, though Zash barely considered the architect worthy of the title. Amateur, he muttered, studying a grainy photo of Vincent Torino's mangled corpse. The architect's methods were brutally efficient but completely lacking in artistic vision. Where was the philosophy? Where was the deeper meaning? Killing loan sharks and corrupt cops was just another form of self-deception, pretending that some lives mattered more than others, that justice was anything more than a fairy tale adults told themselves. It was crude violence masquerading as righteousness, no different from the lies his own victims had believed. "You'll learn," Zash said to the photo, his reflection ghost-like in the glass frame. "When we finally meet, I'll teach you what real artistry looks like. I'll show you the difference between killing and creating." He pulled out his phone and carefully documented tonight's work, each photo composed to capture not just the death but the story it told. The images went to an encrypted email account that would forward them to a journalist hungry enough for a story to ignore the ethical implications. The city needed to remember Victor Zash. They needed to understand that rehabilitation was a comfortable lie, that some monsters couldn't be caged or cured or reasoned with. His gallery was a testament to that truth, written in blood and suffering. Walking past his collection one final time, Zash paused beneath Jenny's corpse. Her dead eyes stared at nothing, finally at peace in a way they'd never been during her pathetic little life. "Thank you for understanding," he whispered to her flesh. "You fought so hard to live, and that made your death so much more meaningful." Then he turned and walked into the Gotham night, leaving his masterpiece to ripen in the darkness. Next time he got arrested, he would sit again in some doctor's office and play the role of the reformed criminal. He would talk about managing his urges through meditation, about finding purpose in helping others, and maybe even shed a carefully calculated tear or two. But tonight, he was exactly what he had always been, death walking among the living, showing them truths they were too cowardly to face. 3 days later, Gotham University. Alex sat in advanced criminal psychology, half listening to Dr. Rebecca's talk about rehabilitation theory and the fundamental belief that every human being could be saved given proper treatment and support. The words felt like acid in his ears, each mention of second chances and healing through therapy making his jaw clench tighter. His phone buzzed with a news alert that sent white-hot rage coursing through his veins. Breaking: 8 bodies found in abandoned warehouse. Police confirm Victor Zash suspected in ritualistic murders. 8 victims arranged in what witnesses described as a wheel of death. Children's artwork used as decoration. A kindergarten teacher tortured for days while her students' drawings watched. The details were already leaking to social media, spreading horror and outrage across the city like wildfire. Alex's hands trembled as he gripped his pen, the plastic creaking under the pressure. The system had failed again. Parole boards and psychiatrists and social workers had all signed off on releasing a monster back into the world, and now 8 more people were dead because they believed in rehabilitation over justice. Because they thought they could fix something that was fundamentally, irredeemably broken. His vision blurred with rage as Dr. Rebecca continued her lecture about the importance of treating even the worst offenders with dignity and compassion. The hypocrisy was suffocating. Here they sat in their ivory tower, debating theoretical models of human redemption while real people died because of their naive idealism. Alex forced himself to take notes, his handwriting getting progressively sharper and more violent as the class dragged on. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The careful patience he'd maintained, the methodical planning, the intellectual approach to justice, all of it burned away in the face of pure, undiluted fury. When class finally ended, he packed his books mechanically, not trusting himself to speak to anyone. Then he walked across campus toward his apartment, the rage inside him crystallizing into something harder and more focused than mere anger. Zash thought he was untouchable, that the excuse of insanity would protect him while he butchered innocence in the name of his twisted philosophy. Now that is going to change. He can run from the law. But he can't run from me. Chapter 24. The Survivor's Nightmare. Emma Walsh had stopped looking in mirrors 3 months ago. Not completely. She couldn't avoid them entirely. But she'd learned to focus on specific parts: her eyes when brushing her teeth, her hands when washing dishes, and her feet when getting dressed. Never the whole picture. Never the roadmap of scars that turned her body into Victor Zash's autobiography. The safe house apartment in the Bowery was supposed to be temporary. That's what Detective Gonzalez had promised when the cops moved her here after the trial. Just until the appeal process is finished, Emma. Then we'll get you set up somewhere new, somewhere he can never find you. That was 3 months ago. The appeal had been denied. Zash's death sentence had been commuted to life. And Emma was still here, in this one-bedroom prison with reinforced locks and panic buttons, jumping every time the radiator clanged or the upstairs neighbor dropped something heavy. She sat cross-legged on her couch, laptop balanced on her knees, trying to focus on the freelance graphic design work that kept her rent paid. The client wanted something edgy for their horror movie poster. Ironic, considering Emma lived in a horror story every single day. The TV murmured in the background. She kept on local news for the illusion of human voices. She developed a pathological fear of silence over the past year. Silence meant she could hear her own breathing, her own heartbeat, the same sound Zash had whispered about during those days in his warehouse. "Your pulse is so fast, Emma," his voice echoed in her memory. "Like a little bird's heart. But don't worry, I'm going to teach you to fly." Day 1 had been the psychological preparation. Zash had shown her photographs of his previous victims, explaining in clinical detail what he'd done to each one. "This is Margaret," he'd said, pointing to a woman suspended by fishing wire. "She begged me to kill her children first so they wouldn't have to watch. I explained that witnessing truth is the greatest gift I could give them." Day 2 was when he'd started carving. Not random cuts, deliberate letters, symbols, a proof of ownership across her skin. "E.W. Emma Walsh," he'd whispered while she screamed through the gag. "So I remember which one you are." Each cut had been calculated to cause maximum pain without permanent damage. He wanted her functional for what came next. "Do you know what makes you special, Emma?" he'd asked while photographing her wounds. "You have a daughter. She's 7 years old, isn't she? Julia. She goes to Gotham Elementary and walks home past the playground every day at 3:15. Such a predictable little creature." The threat had broken something inside Emma that even the physical torture couldn't touch. He'd shown her Julia's school photo, somehow obtained from God knows where. "After we finish our project here, I thought we might collaborate on something smaller. Children are so much more malleable." She shook her head violently, forcing the memory away. Dr. Sharma had taught her techniques for this: grounding exercises, breathing patterns, and ways to pull herself back to the present. "Name 5 things you can see." The cracked ceiling. The yellow couch cushions. The stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table. The body discovered in a Gotham warehouse matches the signature methodology of convicted serial killer Victor Zash, who was released on parole a few days ago after serving. Emma's laptop clattered to the floor as she lunged for the remote, but she was too late. The news anchor's voice continued while crime scene photos flashed across the screen. A warehouse. Bodies hanging in a circle. And in the center, Emma ran to the bathroom and vomited until her stomach was empty, then dry heaved until her ribs ached. When she finally looked up, her reflection stared back from the medicine cabinet mirror. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, and the crisscross scars across her torso spelling out words in Zash's careful script. Unfinished carved across her collarbone. Chapter 1 etched into her shoulder blade. And on her stomach, the cruelest touch, Julia next in letters deep enough to never fully fade. Day 3 had been preparation for the finale. Zash had spent hours explaining exactly what he planned to do to her daughter while Emma was forced to watch. "I've been studying child psychology," he'd said conversationally while sharpening his tools. 7-year-olds still believe in monsters under the bed. I plan to prove them right." He'd made Emma write a letter to Julia in her own handwriting, explaining Mommy was somewhere safe and would come to fetch her soon. "Read it aloud," he'd commanded. "I want to hear how it sounds in your voice before we record the video message." The escape had been pure desperation, not courage, not cleverness, just a mother's terror overriding every other instinct. She'd sawed through her restraints with glass from a broken bottle, her hands so slippery with blood she could barely grip the makeshift blade. Every second expecting to hear his footsteps returning, knowing that if he caught her, Julia would pay the price for her defiance. Her hands shook as she splashed cold water on her face. This wasn't supposed to happen. The psychiatrists had testified that he was making progress. The whole damn team had promised. Her phone rang, making her jump so hard she knocked over the toothbrush holder. Detective Gonzalez's name appeared on the screen. Emma? Emma, are you there? I saw the news, she whispered, automatically pulling her shirt higher to cover the scars. Even alone, she couldn't bear to see them. Listen to me carefully. We're implementing emergency protocols. A unit is already on the way to move you to a secondary location. Pack only essentials, you have 10 minutes. He will be looking for me, won't he? The words came out flat, emotionless. She was too tired for hysteria. He's going to finish what he started. Gonzalez paused too long before answering. The crime scene, there are elements that suggest you might be a specific target. We're not taking any chances. Emma laughed, high and bitter. Elements? What kind of elements, detective? Let me guess, he left a message for me, didn't he? Another pause. Emma, I need you to stay calm. What did it say? Her voice was getting stronger, anger burning through the numbness. What did the sick bastard write this time? There was a photograph. Of Julia. Her current school photo. And a note that said, "Tell Emma I'm ready for chapter 2. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering on the tile floor. Of course. Of course he'd kept his promise. Victor Zash never lied about his intentions. That was what made him so terrifying. He told her exactly what he planned to do, and now he was doing it. She'd escaped on day 3, during the brief window when he'd left to acquire more materials. The handcuff key she'd palmed during his creepy monologue, the broken glass she'd hidden in her sleeve, and 20 minutes of desperate sawing through rope while praying he wouldn't return early. Then stumbling through the warehouse district, bleeding and half-naked, until a night shift worker at the power plant called 911. But escape had been the easy part. Living afterwards, carrying the knowledge of what he'd planned for day 4, day 5, and day 6, that was the real prison. She walked back to the living room like a ghost, moving automatically. Pack only essentials. What was essential when a monster was hunting your child? Some clothes. Her medications, antidepressants, sleeping pills, and the anti-anxiety prescription that barely kept the nightmares at bay. The laptop with her work files, because even when running for your life, bills don't pay themselves. But first, she needed to call Julia's school. Needed to make sure her daughter was safe, that extra security was in place, and that the teachers understood this wasn't a drill or an overprotective mother's paranoia. This was life and death, and Julia was 7 years old, and she didn't even know why mommy had those scars or why they'd moved 4 times in 3 months or why there were always strange men watching their house. Emma's hands stopped shaking as cold rage replaced terror. He thought fear would paralyze her the way it had in that warehouse, when she'd been helpless and alone. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd threatened her daughter. And a mother protecting her child was capable of anything. As she zipped up her go bag, something crinkled under the couch cushions. She pulled out a black envelope, expensive paper with her name written in elegant script. Her blood turned to ice water, then began burning with something fiercer than fear. With trembling fingers that quickly steadied, she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper with text in the same careful handwriting. When justice fails, judgment comes. Your daughter will be safe. Victor Zash will not. A friend who understands. Emma stared at the words until they burned into her retinas. Someone else knew. Someone else had been watching, waiting, and planning. Someone who understood that the courts had failed, that mercy was weakness, and that monsters like Zash deserved something far worse than prison. The architect. It had to be. The vigilante killer who'd been eliminating the worst of Gotham's predators while the heroes played by rules that protected no one. For the first time in 3 months, Emma Walsh smiled. And it was a terrible smile, full of anticipation and righteous fury. She was still smiling when the unmarked police car arrived, when the federal marshals escorted her to another safe house in another anonymous neighborhood. But Emma clutched the black envelope in her jacket pocket and felt something she hadn't experienced since the day she escaped that warehouse. Hope. Architect. Someone who understood that the only way to stop a monster was to become something worse. Emma had been Zash's victim once. She wouldn't make that mistake again. This time, she had an ally. This time, the monster had competition. She looked out the car window at Gotham's endless sprawl of shadows and neon, and for the first time in 3 months, she wasn't afraid of what might be lurking in the darkness. Because something even darker was hunting on her behalf. Chapter 25. Media Expert. Batcave. The Batcave's massive computer screens flickered with the cold blue light of digital surveillance, casting harsh shadows across Batman's angular features. Dozens of feeds streamed simultaneously, thermal imaging from abandoned warehouses, motion sensors in derelict subway tunnels, and audio pickups positioned throughout Gotham's industrial wasteland. 37 locations under active surveillance, Batman reported to Alfred, his gauntlet fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Every known Zash hideout from his previous killing sprees, plus 17 additional sites that match his psychological profile. Alfred approached with his characteristic measured stride, carrying a silver tray with untouched coffee that had long since grown cold. And the architect, Master Bruce? Any indication of his movements? Batman's jaw tightened beneath the cowl. Nothing. He's either gone to ground completely, or he's planning something that requires patience. He pulled up a three-dimensional map of Gotham's underground, red dots marking each surveillance point like drops of blood on pale skin. But Zash won't stay hidden long. His compulsion is too strong. The need to kill, to add new marks to his body, it's like an addiction. He'll surface soon. Perhaps that's what concerns me, Alfred murmured, slightly adjusting his posture. What if the architect is counting on that predictability? What if Victor Zash isn't the hunter in this equation? The thought had occurred to Batman more than once during the long hours of preparation. In Gotham, predators often became prey with shocking swiftness, and the line between justice and vengeance was written in ink that changed color depending on the light. The architect had demonstrated inhuman planning and execution in his previous kills, too precise for someone driven by simple vigilante rage. Then we watch both of them, Batman said finally. Let Zash think he's hunting while we monitor every shadow, every movement. When the architect makes his move, we'll be ready. Batman activated additional protocols, expanding the surveillance net beyond physical locations to include digital monitoring, police scanners, hospital emergency frequencies, and even the underground networks that criminals use to communicate. If either predator so much as breathed too loudly, the Batcave's electronic web would detect it. Alfred, I want you monitoring these feeds personally. Any anomaly, any deviation from normal patterns, I need to know immediately. Of course, sir. Though I do hope we're not simply providing a front row seat to another massacre. Batman turned back to the screens, watching empty rooms and abandoned corridors that might soon become killing grounds. Somewhere in the city, two vicious criminals were closing in on each other, and when they finally met, trouble was bound to follow. Next day, Vicky Vale's studio. The television studio blazed with artificial light, harsh and unforgiving as an interrogation room. Vicky Vale sat across from Alex Thorne, her smile barely concealing the hunger that all good journalists carried like a perfume. Between them, cameras recorded every micro-expression, every careful word that would soon be broadcast to millions of viewers hungry for insight into their city's darkness. Tonight on Gotham After Dark, we're discussing the psychological profile of the vigilante calling himself the architect, Vale announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a career on other people's tragedies. Joining me today is Alex Thorne, a sharp mind from Gotham University's criminal psychology program. His groundbreaking work on vigilantism, psychopaths, and the cracks in our societal systems has earned him international acclaim across some of the most respected online journals. Alex smiled with precisely the right mixture of humility and confidence, his hands folded in his lap with the composure of someone completely comfortable under scrutiny. To the viewing audience, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a young academic thrust into the spotlight by his expertise in criminal behavior. Mr. Thorne, Vale continued, leaning forward, you've studied the architect's methods extensively. What drives someone to become a vigilante? It's a complex psychological phenomenon, Alex replied, his voice measured and professional. Vigilantism typically emerges from a profound sense of injustice, combined with a loss of faith in institutional authority. The individual begins to see themselves as the only force capable of restoring balance to a system they perceive as fundamentally broken. As he spoke, Alex was acutely aware of every word, every gesture, and every carefully modulated inflection. This wasn't just an interview, it was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to serve multiple purposes simultaneously. To the general public, he was providing rational analysis of an irrational phenomenon. To Batman and the GCPD, he was offering psychological insights that would subtly misdirect their investigation. And to Victor Zash, wherever the scarred killer might be watching, he was presenting himself as the perfect target. But surely, Vale pressed, there's something admirable about someone taking action when the system fails? The architect has eliminated some truly dangerous criminals. Alex's expression grew grave, precisely as he'd rehearsed. That's the dangerous appeal of vigilante justice, Ms. Vale. It seduces the weak-minded with the illusion of control, a way to feel powerful in a world they can't truly understand. But strip away the theatrics, and what do you have? Just another coward hiding behind a mask, too afraid to confront the real complexities of justice. He paused, letting the insult breathe, before driving the knife in. The architect doesn't challenge the system, he imitates it, poorly. From a psychological standpoint, he's not a visionary. He's a narcissist with a flair for performance art. All ego, no substance. Each word was a surgical strike, not just discrediting the architect's actions, but dismantling the self-image he likely clung to. Alex didn't stop there. A true artist of death, he added, voice cold and precise, would never need to broadcast their work. They wouldn't need the city to notice. But this one? He craves attention. Applause. Validation. He's less a predator and more a child throwing a tantrum because the world refused to clap. Now, those were words crafted to burn. To goad. To reach into the dark and strike at Zash's pride, the one thing a killer like him could never let go unpunished. The words were calculated poison, designed to infuriate anyone who saw themselves as a true artist of death. Alex continued his analysis, painting the architect as a garden-variety killer with delusions of grandeur, someone who lacked the vision and sophistication to understand true artistry in violence. In my professional opinion, Alex concluded, looking directly into the camera with the confidence of absolute authority, the architect is a deeply disturbed individual who uses the rhetoric of justice to justify his own sadistic impulses. He's not a hero, he's a monster who's simply chosen targets that make his crimes seem palatable to desperate people. Perfect. If Victor Zash was watching, and Alex was certain he was, those words would burn like acid in the killer's diseased mind. Zash saw himself as an artist similar to architect, a philosopher of death who revealed profound truths about human nature. Tim Drake's apartment. Tim Drake sat in his cluttered apartment near Gotham University, his forensic psychology textbook scattered across a desk lit by the harsh glow of multiple computer monitors. The Vicky Vale interview played on his television, but his attention was focused on the laptop screen, where he'd been analyzing frame-by-frame footage of Alex Thorne's media appearances over the past several days. Something was wrong. Tim couldn't pinpoint exactly what triggered his investigative instincts, but years of training under Batman had taught him to trust the subtle warnings that ordinary people dismissed as paranoia. On the surface, Alex Thorne appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a brilliant graduate student with an unusual gift for criminal psychology. But beneath that polished academic veneer, Tim sensed something that made his skin crawl. The architect may believe he's dispensing justice, Thorne said on the television, his voice carrying perfect professorial authority, but from a psychological perspective, he's simply another predator who's convinced himself that his violence is righteous. Tim paused the recording and zoomed in on Thorne's face, studying the micro-expressions that most people would never notice. There, a tiny tightening around the eyes when he said predator, a barely perceptible shift in posture that suggested he was drawing from personal experience rather than academic theory. Most telling of all was what wasn't there. When people discussed violent criminals, even trained psychologists showed subtle signs of discomfort, a slight tension in the shoulders, an unconscious distancing gesture, some indication that they were discussing something fundamentally alien to their own nature. Alex Thorne showed none of these normal human responses. He spoke about predators and violence with a clinical detachment of someone describing the weather. Tim pulled up additional footage from Thorne's previous interviews, creating a comparative analysis of his speech patterns and body language. The consistency was unsettling. Thorne never showed even the slightest emotional response to discussions of torture, murder, or psychological trauma. His heart rate never elevated, his breathing never changed, and his pupils never dilated. It was as if he were discussing abstract mathematical concepts rather than the brutal realities of human evil. "Either you're the most emotionally detached academic in Gotham," Tim murmured to the frozen image on his screen, "or you're something else entirely." He made a mental note to dig deeper into Thorne's background, perhaps even bringing his concerns to Batman if the evidence warranted it. In Gotham, the line between expert and participant was often thinner than most people realized, and Tim had learned not to trust anyone who seemed too perfectly suited to their role. Note, he doesn't suspect Alex of being the architect, but he senses that Alex is exceptional in his own way and could easily go dark if he ever crossed the line, because most villains were different in one way or another before they became one. Chapter 26. Bait Taken. Zash's Hideout. In the bowels of an abandoned meat processing facility, Victor Zash sat motionless before a wall of television screens, his scarred flesh pale as bone in the flickering light. The building still reeked of old blood and rust, making it the perfect cathedral for someone who worshipped at the altar of death. Around him, the tools of his trade lay arranged, knives of every conceivable shape and size, each one honed to razor sharpness and hungry for flesh. "He doesn't get it," he snarled, flinging the chair across the room with a crash that echoed through rusted hooks and decaying walls. "He doesn't get any of it." On the central screen, Alex Thorne's face lingered in still frame, mouth mid-sentence, eyes brimming with quiet authority. The interview had been playing on loop for hours. Zash didn't just watch. He absorbed. Every twitch. Every inflection. Every condescending pause as Thorne dissected men like him with plain words and smug detachment. He's not a visionary. He's a narcissist with a flair for performance art. All ego, no substance. That line. That line. Zash screamed. A sharp, guttural, animal sound. He grabbed the nearest knife from the table, long, curved, still wet, and drove it into the screen. Sparks burst. Glass cracked. Thorne's mouth split open under the blade in a shattered smile. "You think this is a game? A stunt? I'm not some street clown carving headlines into corpses." He tore the blade free, panting, eyes wild with fury and something worse, hurt. Real, deep, humiliating hurt. A high priest mocked before his altar. "You think you can reduce people like me to a footnote in your little journal? A paragraph between your coffee and your therapist?" He turned in a circle, manic, mouth twitching. "You sit in your little tower, flapping your tongue like you understand death, like you've ever heard it breathing behind your neck. You analyze me like I'm some lab rat. You want to study monsters, Thorne?" Zash whispered, his voice barely audible above the building's mechanical hum. "I think it's time you met your teacher." He moved to a makeshift desk where he kept his correspondence materials, expensive paper stolen from hotel lobbies, ink made from a mixture of his own blood and industrial chemicals, and quills sharpened to the max, along with a variety of other things. The letter he composed was a work of art in itself, each word drawn red with blood for maximum psychological impact. "Dear Alex, I caught your interview. Fascinating stuff, really. You talk about predators with such confidence, like you've got us all figured out. The way you throw around terms like monster and killer, it's almost cute. But tell me, have you ever stopped to really think about what drives us? What fuels the ones who turn death into something beautiful? You speak of the architect as if he were some common criminal, some garden variety killer who lacks vision and sophistication. A cliché. That's where you reveal how little you understand. From your cozy perch behind glass and books, you break down the work, our art, like it's just pathology. But some truths aren't meant to be studied. They're meant to be felt. I think it's time for a more practical education. Consider this your enrollment in my advanced seminar, The Art of Revealing Truth. The curriculum will be intensive, and I assure you, the lessons will leave lasting impressions. Class begins very soon, Mr. Thorne. Attendance is mandatory. Your devoted instructor, VZPS. I've added 8 new marks to my collection since my escape. I wonder how many you'll inspire before our studies are complete. Zash sealed the letter in an envelope that he marked with a small symbol carved into the paper itself, a stylized representation of a human face with no features, the kind of blank canvas that he specialized in creating. Tomorrow, he'd begin the real work, delivering the message and dragging Thorne, inch by inch, into the raw truth of what death really means. He could end Alex whenever he wanted. One slice. Quick. Clean. Forgettable. But that's not how Zash worked. That letter wasn't a warning. It was the first cut. He wanted the little bastard to feel it crawling under his skin, tightening around his spine, long before the knife ever touched him. Next day, Alex's apartment. Alex Thorne sat in his furnished apartment, the glow of multiple computer screens casting harsh shadows across his angular features. Around him, the tools of his academic deception lay carefully arranged: psychology textbooks with highlighted passages he'd never actually read, research papers on criminal behavior downloaded but never studied, and diplomas and certificates that told the story of a brilliant young mind dedicated to understanding human evil. It was all theater, of course. Alex had learned everything he needed to know about human nature not from books or professors, but from the memories he'd consumed, the experiences he'd absorbed from his victims. Every act of violence, every moment of terror, every final desperate breath had become part of his vast library of knowledge about what people truly were beneath their civilized pretenses. The interview with Vicky Vale had gone exactly as planned. To the viewing public, he'd appeared as the voice of reason, the academic authority who understood both the psychology of vigilantism and the importance of due process. To Batman and the GCPD, he'd planted subtle misdirections that would send their investigation of Architect down blind alleys and false leads. And to Victor Zash, well, he'd presented himself as the most irresistible target imaginable. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Alex smiled, already knowing what he would find. The building's security was adequate for keeping out ordinary intruders, but it was useless against someone who truly understood the art of infiltration. He opened the door to find the hallway empty, but on the floor lay a manila envelope with his name written in the spidery handwriting that seemed to crawl across the paper like dried blood. Inside, he found exactly what he'd been hoping for: a photograph from his television interview with a red circle drawn around his face, and beneath it, a letter written in the same crawling script that betrayed its author's deteriorating mental state. As he read Zash's words, Alex felt a familiar warmth spreading through his chest, the satisfaction of a master manipulator watching his carefully laid plans come to fruition. Victor Zash had taken the bait completely. The scarred killer saw him as an arrogant academic who needed to be taught the true nature of death, never suspecting that his prospective victim was actually the one who'd been planning his destruction since the moment news of his latest killing spree had broken. Alex walked to his window and looked out at the city sprawling below, a cancer of corruption and violence that fed on the innocent and protected the guilty. Somewhere out there, Batman was weaving his web of surveillance, convinced that technology and preparation could prevent the coming storm. Somewhere else, Victor Zash was planning his next lesson in the art of revealing truth, already imagining the screams he would get from his new student. They were all dancing to his tune, whether they knew it or not, playing out their roles in a twisted symphony of violence. And when it reached its final note, it wouldn't be chaos. It would be justice, the kind this rotten city could never deliver on its own. Alex returned to his desk and began typing his next academic paper, ostensibly an analysis of how media coverage influenced criminal behavior. But his real thoughts were focused on the tools he would need, the preparations that had to be made, and the careful choreography required to transform Victor Zash from predator to prey. The game was entering its next phase. Chapter 27. Bruce Wayne. The rain slammed against the Gothic windows of Wayne Manor, each drop carrying the weight of Gotham's perpetual gloom. Alex Thorne adjusted his tie as he stepped from the taxi with his briefcase in hand, the leather already slick with moisture. The manor loomed before him, a monument to old money and older secrets, its gargoyles looking down through the storm as if they knew exactly what kind of predator had come calling. How fitting, Alex mused, that Gotham's golden boy would invite the monster to his very doorstep. The heavy oak doors opened before he could knock, revealing an elderly man whose military bearing was as obvious as a loaded gun. Alfred Pennyworth, the perfect soldier playing the perfect servant, but Alex's enhanced senses caught the subtle tells. The way his feet were positioned for quick movement, the way his eyes swept the perimeter even while greeting a guest, and the faint outline of what could only be a concealed weapon beneath his perfectly pressed vest. "Mr. Thorne, I presume?" Alfred's voice carried the refined flow of British nobility, but underneath it was steel. "Master Wayne is expecting you in the study." Alex smiled, the practiced expression of a concerned psychology student, not the hunter that lurked beneath his human facade. "Thank you. Terrible weather we're having." "Indeed, sir. Gotham weather has a way of bringing out the worst in people." Or the truest parts, Alex thought as he followed Alfred through corridors lined with portraits of dead Waynes. Each painting seemed to judge him with their painted eyes, as if they somehow knew that their family's legacy was about to be unraveled by something that had long ago stopped being human. The study was exactly what Alex had expected: floor-to-ceiling books that probably hadn't been read in decades, a fireplace that crackled with artificial warmth, and leather furniture that screamed old money. But it was the moon rising from behind the mahogany desk that confirmed everything Alex had already suspected. Bruce Wayne looked like a magazine cover, the kind of manufactured perfection that came from unlimited resources and careful image management. But Alex's instincts saw past the facade immediately. The way Bruce moved spoke of countless hours of combat training, even if it was concealed to the max. The subtle scarring on his knuckles that expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. The micro-expression suggested a mind constantly calculating, always 3 steps ahead. Most telling of all was how Bruce's pupils dilated slightly when their eyes met, the involuntary response of someone recognizing a potential threat. "Mr. Thorne," Bruce extended a hand, his grip firm but not excessive. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Your commentary on the Vicky Vale show was enlightening, particularly your condemnation of vigilante justice." "Please, call me Alex." The handshake lasted a little too long, each man quietly sizing the other up. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious why Gotham's most eligible bachelor needs a consultation on criminal psychology." Bruce gestured to the leather chairs by the fireplace, and Alex noted how he positioned himself with clear sightlines to both entrances and the sophisticated security system discreetly embedded in the walls, with motion sensors disguised as decorative elements. Every detail screamed professional-grade paranoia. Wayne Manor isn't just a home, it's a fortress. And fortresses are built by people with dangerous enemies. "Recent events have made me cautious," Bruce said, settling into his chair gracefully. "The architect's emergence has created an atmosphere of fear in the city. My business interests require me to understand the methods of someone capable of such theatrical brutality." Alex leaned back, studying Bruce's face, noting the barely healed minute cut along his jawline, the way he favored his left shoulder slightly, injuries that spoke of recent violent encounters. "I appreciate your concern for public safety, Mr. Wayne. Though I have to say, I find vigilantism in all its forms to be deeply troubling. The architect, Batman, they're all symptoms of a society that's lost faith in our judiciary." Interesting perspective. Bruce's eyes never left Alex's face. "You see no difference between Batman's restraint and the architect's methods?" "Violence is violence," Alex replied with conviction that wasn't entirely feigned. "The moment we decide that some people deserve to die without trial, we've abandoned everything that separates civilization from barbarism. Batman may not kill, but he's still a violent criminal operating outside the law." Alex reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder filled with crime scene photos and psychological profiles, all perfectly legitimate academic work that happened to contain insights no student should possess. "The architect represents the logical endpoint of vigilantism," Alex continued, spreading the photos across the coffee table. "Once you decide the system is irredeemably broken, once you place yourself above legal authority, there's no limit to the atrocities you can justify." Bruce leaned forward, studying the images carefully. Alex noticed how Bruce's breathing remained perfectly controlled despite the graphic nature of the photos, how his pupils didn't dilate at the sight of extreme violence. Definitely seen worse. Probably caused worse. Testing complete. The expensive techs, the secrecy, the peak human physique, and considering his parents were murdered? It all adds up. Bruce Wayne is Batman. You seem to have given this considerable thought, Bruce said slowly. It's my field of study, Alex replied with no change in his expression. Criminal psychology, specifically the psychology of those who believe they're above the law. The architect demonstrates a wide range of knowledge of investigative procedures, forensic countermeasures, and criminal psychology itself. This suggests either a law enforcement background or extensive academic study. Alfred appeared silently at Bruce's shoulder, another military tell, the ability to move without sound, and placed a silver tray with coffee and a tablet on the side table. The background check you requested, Master Wayne, Alfred said, his eyes briefly meeting Alex's. The look lasted only a second, but it was enough for Alex to see the professional assessment taking place. They've been busy. Bruce picked up the tablet, scrolling through what Alex assumed was his own dossier. Alexander Thorne. 22 years old. Parents are Dr. Michael and Dr. Eva Thorne, currently conducting research in Central City. Bachelor summa cum laude from Gotham University, now pursuing graduate studies in criminal psychology. No criminal record, no known associates with criminal backgrounds. Alex sipped his coffee, maintaining perfect composure despite knowing he was being dissected. Thorough. I'm a cautious man. Bruce set down the tablet, but Alex caught a glimpse of red flags and assessment notes. Though I have to say, your insights into criminal methodology are unusually detailed for someone with purely academic experience. I have read your papers. They are remarkable for someone your age. Here we go. I believe in thorough research, Alex said carefully. You can't understand criminal psychology from textbooks alone. I've spent considerable time studying actual cases, interviewing subjects when possible, and even riding along with GCPD to observe crime scenes firsthand. Impressive dedication. Bruce's tone suggested he found it perhaps too impressive. Tell me, what's your professional assessment of the architect's psychological profile? Alex allowed himself a slight smile. Honestly, I think he's a narcissistic sociopath with a god complex. He's convinced himself that his actions are morally justified, but in reality, he's just another killer who enjoys the power of life and death. The elaborate staging, the symbolic elements, it's all theater designed to feed his ego. That's a harsh assessment. It's an honest one. The architect has more in common with serial killers like Zash than with any genuine reformer. He's not trying to fix the system, he's trying to replace it with his own twisted version of justice. The fire crackled between them, casting shadows across their faces. Outside, thunder rolled across Gotham like the sound of some great beast stirring in its lair. Bruce stood and walked to the window, staring out at the storm-lashed grounds. And yet his targets have all been individuals who escaped legal consequences for serious crimes. One could argue he's simply correcting failures. One could argue that, Alex agreed. But the moment we accept that argument, we've abandoned the rule of law entirely. Today he kills loan sharks and corrupt cops. Tomorrow, maybe he decides that tax evaders deserve death. Or jaywalkers. There's no limiting principle once you've decided you're judge, jury, and executioner. Bruce turned back to face him, and Alex caught a flicker of something, approval, in those eyes. You speak with considerable passion about this. I believe in justice, Mr. Wayne. Real justice. Not the perverted version that men like the architect and Batman peddle. Alex stood, joining Bruce at the window. The system may be flawed, but it's still better than anarchy. They stood in silence for a moment, two men with secrets taking each other's measure. Outside, lightning illuminated the Wayne family cemetery, where generations of Gotham's elite lay buried beneath big monuments. I think, Bruce said finally, that you'd make an interesting consultant, Alex. Someone with your perspective on criminal psychology could be very valuable. Particularly someone who understands the dangers of vigilantism as clearly as you do. I'd be honored to work with Wayne Enterprises, Alex replied. Though I should warn you, my methods of criminal analysis can be quite intensive. I believe in getting inside the criminal mind, understanding how they think and why they act. Bruce shook his hand, and Alex felt the calluses hidden beneath the soft skin, the kind that came from gripping climbing equipment and fighting barehanded. I wouldn't expect anything less, Bruce said. Alfred will be in touch with the details. As Alfred escorted Alex back through the rain-soaked grounds, Alex's mind raced with satisfaction. The meeting had gone better than expected. He'd confirmed Bruce Wayne's identity as Batman and established himself as an anti-vigilante ally. The irony is delicious, Alex thought as the taxi pulled away from Wayne Manor. Batman hiring the architect to help catch the architect. Back in the study, Bruce watched the taxi's taillights disappear into the storm. Alfred returned, closing the heavy doors against the wind. Your assessment, Master Bruce? Bruce turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. He's not the architect. Too many contradictions, his public stance against vigilantism, his academic background with lack of motive, and the timeline doesn't match our investigation. He paused, picking up the tablet with Alex's profile. But there's something else. His knowledge of criminal methodology is very good. The way he analyzed those crime scenes, his understanding of psychological manipulation. You suspect he has criminal potential? More than potential. Bruce's jaw tightened. I want him monitored on a surface level. Just routine surveillance. Digital. Physical. Everything. He's temporarily cleared of suspicion regarding the architect case, but I want him flagged as high risk. We cannot afford another Harvey Dent. All it takes is a push from someone like Joker, and he could fall. Alfred raised an eyebrow. High risk, sir. Someone with his intellect, insights, and methodical approach could become extremely dangerous under the right circumstances. He has all the tools to become a master manipulator or worse. Bruce set down the tablet. For now, he's useful as a consultant. We use him and we keep a watch on him at the same time. Okay, Master Bruce. I shall prepare the surveillance protocols. Do it. And Alfred. Bruce's voice carried a warning. If Alex Thorne ever shows signs of crossing the line, I want to know immediately. Men like him don't stay neutral forever. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and somewhere in Gotham's darkness, the real monster smiled at how perfectly the evening had gone. Chapter 28. The Loop begins. The morning fog clung to Gotham University's campus like a burial shroud, muffling the sounds of students shuffling between classes. A disguised Victor Zash crouched behind a concrete pillar outside the psychology building, his fingers absently tracing the hidden scars that mapped his kills across his forearms. Each mark told a story. Each story ended in screaming. Alex Thorne would make a beautiful addition to his collection. The famous psychology consultant had captured Zash's attention during the televised interview, the way he'd mocked serial killers as pathetic attention seekers with delusions of artistry, dismissing their work as juvenile attempts at meaning by fundamentally broken minds. Most academics spouted careful, diplomatic nonsense, but this one had compared them to stupid attention-seeking idiots. He could taste the insult in every word and feel the rage burning in his chest like acid. He'd been watching Alex for 3 days now, mapping his routines and studying his habits. The young psychologist was methodical, arriving at 8:47 a.m. precisely, always carrying the same leather satchel, always taking the same route through the quad. Zash appreciated routine. It made the hunt so much more satisfying when you finally broke the pattern. What Zash didn't know was that Alex had detected his surveillance within the first hour. Enhanced senses were a gift that kept giving. The architect could hear Zash's elevated heartbeat from across the courtyard, could smell the metallic tang of old blood that clung to the killer's clothes, and could sense the lurking tension radiating from his hiding spots. But instead of simply ending the threat, Alex decided to play. Killing Zash for revenge? That's exactly what he'd want. You don't punish a man who worships death by giving him what he desires. The game began subtly. As Alex walked toward the campus coffee shop, he caught a glimpse of Zash following at a distance. Perfect. With a thought, Alex's form began to shift, not dramatically, just enough. His height decreased by 2 inches, his hair darkened to brown, and his facial structure softened into feminine features. By the time he pushed through the coffee shop door, he was indistinguishable from Patrick Summers, a sophomore psychology major. "Morning, Han," the barista called out to Zash, a middle-aged woman named Dolores who served him yesterday. "What can I get you?" Real Alex had already shifted again, this time from Patrick into Dolores's exact form, standing behind the counter as if he'd been there all morning. The real Dolores was in the storage room, completely unaware that her doppelganger was serving customers. When Zash entered 30 seconds later, Alex looked up with Dolores's warm smile. "Black coffee, corner booth," Alex said pleasantly, already pouring the drink for Zash. "You always order the same thing, sweetie. Sit in the same spot too. Creatures of habit, aren't we?" Zash froze. He'd been here exactly once before, yesterday, ordering silently and paying with exact change. How could she possibly know his preferences? Yes, he managed, accepting the steaming cup with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Black coffee." "Be careful walking alone at night," Alex added, his tone shifting to something deeper, more concerned. "Dangerous people out there." The words hit Zash like ice water. He stared at the barista's face, kind eyes, motherly smile, nothing threatening about her at all. Yet something felt fundamentally wrong about the interaction. The timing. The knowing look. The way she'd anticipated his order. He took his coffee to the corner booth, the same one he'd sat in yesterday, and tried to shake off the unease. He was Victor Zash. He was the predator, not the prey. Random coincidences happened all the time. The boy was gone. Damn it. No matter, just 2 more days until his new tools arrive. That's more than enough time. Across the quad, Alex was already shifting again. By the time Zash boarded the bus 40 minutes later, Alex had become Marcus Williams, the regular driver who worked the university route. Same uniform, same weathered hands, same slight limp from an old service injury. The real Marcus was dealing with a conveniently timed emergency phone call from his wife. "Afternoon," Alex said as Zash climbed aboard, studying the killer's face in the rearview mirror. "Back left seat, right? You always sit there. Like to watch the other passengers, don't you?" Zash's blood turned to slush. Yesterday had been his first time on this particular bus route. He'd chosen the back left seat randomly, purely for the tactical advantage of seeing everyone while remaining partially hidden. How could this driver possibly know that? Just the usual spot," Zash mumbled. "Be careful walking alone at night," Marcus added with the same concerned inflection and the same timing as the barista. "Dangerous people out there." The words were identical. The tone was identical. Even the slight pause before dangerous was identical. Zash stumbled to his seat, his mind racing. 2 different people, same warning, same delivery. Coincidence? Or was someone playing games with him? He spent the bus ride studying every passenger, searching for threats, analyzing facial expressions and body language. Nothing. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives, completely unaware that death was sitting 3 rows behind them. The university library was Zash's final stop of the day. He liked to research his targets there, reading psychology texts to better understand how their minds worked before he broke them. Knowledge was power, and power made the art more beautiful. But when he approached the circulation desk, his world tilted sideways. "Psychology section again?" asked the elderly librarian, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. "You always read the same books in the same order, don't you, dear? Abnormal psychology, then criminal behavior, then forensic psychiatry. Very methodical of you." Zash gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles went white. This was impossible. He'd been to this library exactly once, yesterday, checking out those exact books in that exact sequence. He'd been careful, quiet, forgettable. How could she possibly remember his specific reading pattern? How do you?" "Be careful walking alone at night," the librarian said, her voice dropping to the same concerned register he'd heard twice before. "Dangerous people out there." The world seemed to spin around Zash. Not one, not two, but 3 different people. 3 identical warnings. 3 impossible displays of knowledge about his routine. Someone was watching him. Someone was learning his patterns. Someone was turning his own methods against him. But who? And how? He stumbled out of the library as the sun began to set, his usually steady hand shaking as he lit a cigarette. The familiar routine of killing had always been his anchor, his source of control and meaning. But now that routine felt exposed, predictable, vulnerable. From a rooftop across the street, Alex Thorne watched through binoculars as the serial killer paced nervously on the library steps. The man's body language had completely changed, his shoulders hunched, head swiveling constantly, fingers twitching against his weapons. The predator was becoming paranoid. Alex smiled and began planning tomorrow's performance. The psychological torture was just beginning. After all, before you could break a killer's body, you had to shatter their mind. And Zash's mind was already showing hairline cracks. Soon, those cracks would become chasms. And then the real fun would begin. Chapter 29, The Breaking Point. Victor Zash hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces. All different, yet somehow the same. The same concerned expression. The same warning was delivered in that identical manner. The same impossible knowledge of his most private habits. He paced his apartment like a caged animal, his scarred hands running compulsively through his greasy hair. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and red string connecting various points, a madman's attempt to map a conspiracy that felt too vast and too precise to be coincidence. The psychological torture had escalated beyond the simple repetition of warnings. Yesterday, he'd gone to 3 different stores across the city. At each one, a different cashier had commented on his usual purchases: energy drinks, protein bars, disposable phones. Items he'd never bought before at any of those locations but were on his actual purchase list elsewhere. Yet they all insisted he was a regular customer, even producing loyalty cards with his name on them that he'd never seen before. The gas station attendant had asked about his collection. The pharmacy clerk had inquired about his art project. The grocery store manager had wished him luck with his psychological research. Every interaction felt like a needle under his skin, sharp, precise, and somehow wrong, as if each one was slowly destroying his sense of reality. Someone was orchestrating this. Someone was inside his head, predicting his movements, manipulating his environment without his knowledge. But who? And how were they staying ahead of him? Zash grabbed his laptop and pulled up the video of Alex Thorne's television appearance for the 100th time. That smug face filled the screen, lips moving with arrogance as he dismissed serial killers as broken minds seeking attention. "Pathetic," Alex had said with that clinical smile. These individuals convince themselves they're artists, philosophers, or agents of some greater purpose. In reality, they're just damaged children throwing elaborate tantrums because mommy and daddy didn't love them enough. The words hit like physical blows every time Zash heard them. This academic pretender, this soft-handed theorist who'd never taken a life, dared to mock the purity of his work? Dared to reduce his artistic vision to mere psychology textbook analysis? Zash's hands began to shake, not with fear, but with rage so pure it felt like molten metal in his veins. How dare this pretender say he is an amateur? He was Victor Zash. He was death incarnate. He was the artist who turned screaming flesh into beautiful silence. No more waiting. No more research. Zash snapped. Zash swept the conspiracy materials off his table and spread out a new map, the Gotham University campus. Time for planning was over. Time for games was finished. Tomorrow, he would take Alex Thorne and give me a hands-on lesson in reality. The psychology consultant wanted to study criminal minds? Perfect. He could examine Zash's methods from the inside out, one cut at a time, until he understood the true meaning of suffering. Zash pulled out his collection of blades, each one honed to the utmost sharpness. He ran his finger along the edge of his favorite knife, a thin, flexible fillet blade perfect for precise work. A drop of blood beaded on his fingertip, and he smiled for the first time in days. "Let's see how smart you are when you're tied to my table, Dr. Thorne," he whispered to the photograph on his laptop screen. "Let's see how much psychology helps you when I start removing pieces." He began to pack his tools with ritualistic care. Only a fresh kill will extinguish his urge and paranoia. Outside his apartment window, perched impossibly on a fire escape 5 stories up, Alex Thorne watched through the grimy glass. His enhanced hearing had caught every muttered word, every scrape of metal against metal as Zash prepared his instruments. The serial killer's psychological breakdown was proceeding exactly as planned. The paranoia, the rage, the desperate need to reclaim control, all of it was pushing Zash toward the precise moment Alex wanted him to strike. Tomorrow, Alex would allow himself to be kidnapped. His plan to become Zash's singular obsession has worked and the finale is set. And then, when the killer was at his most confident, most vulnerable, most convinced of his superiority. Tomorrow, the architect would teach Victor Zash the difference between an artist and a god. Alex smiled in the darkness and began to plan his own performance. After all, he had a reputation to maintain. Chapter 30. The Hunt. The morning fog clung to Gotham University's campus like a shroud, masking the predator that moved between the shadows of Gothic architecture. Victor Zash crouched behind a maintenance shed, his scarred fingers drumming against the cold metal as he watched the psychology building's entrance. 3 days of identical warnings. 3 days of some random strangers knowing his patterns. 3 days of feeling like prey instead of predator. His mind felt like it was coming apart at the seams. "They're all watching me from somewhere," he thought, unconsciously running his thumb over the fresh scar on his forearm, still tender, still promising relief that never came. "But I'm the predator. I've always been the predator. This shitty feeling is tearing me apart from inside. God, I need to cut something, anything. I need to cut. Breathe, just breathe." Zash tried to calm himself. Enough patience. Time to collect what's owed. Everything else can go rot in hell. From his perch atop the library's clock tower, Batman watched through high-powered binoculars as Zash began moving toward the psychology building. The killer had been escalating for days, and Bruce had been waiting for this moment. The architect had a pattern. He appeared when monsters like Zash escaped their punishment. Batman activated his comm unit. "Alfred, confirm Alex Thorne's location." "Thermal imaging shows him asleep in his apartment, Master Bruce. Has been for the past 4 hours. Quite soundly, I might add." "Good," Batman replied, watching Zash disappear into the building. "If the architect shows up here, we'll know for certain they're not the same person." Through his scope, Bruce maintained his surveillance. Alex Thorne's alibi was solid: thermal imaging that revealed the heat signature of a dreaming body, motion sensors that detected the subtle movements of REM sleep, and facial recognition that confirmed his presence. Judging by the architect's abilities so far, he seemed like a nightmare stitched together, shapeshifting that mocked the very concept of identity, puppet mastery that reduced free will to illusion, and the power to turn ordinary people into walking bombs. Which meant if the architect appeared to confront Zash now, Bruce would have gotten another factor that separates Alex and the architect. In the psychology building, Alex Thorne, or rather, the architect wearing Alex's face, waited in the empty lecture hall. His ability to shapeshift into another person is still a secret. While some low-life criminal sleeps in his apartment, perfectly disguised as him and providing a solid alibi, he is free to hunt. "Let's give our serial killer what he's been asking for," the architect thought, his muscles coiling with superhuman strength carefully masked by human proportions. The lecture hall door creaked open, and Zash slipped inside, his blade catching the fluorescent light. "Alex Thorne," Zash whispered, his voice carrying an artist's reverence. "The famous shrink who thinks he understands monsters." The architect turned slowly, wearing Alex's gentle academic smile. "Victor Zash. I was wondering when you'd stop playing games and come find me directly." "Games?" Zash's scarred face twisted. "The last 3 days. Was that you, kid? How did you do it?" "Serial killers," the architect replied, maintaining Alex's mannerisms perfectly. Fascinating species, don't you think? I have been studying how they respond to various unexpected situations. What makes them paranoid? What breaks them? What makes them rage? So far, the data is good. You are still very predictable. Zash snarled and lunged forward, his blade aimed at the architect's throat. But the figure wearing Alex's face moved with inhuman speed, not enough to reveal supernatural abilities, but far beyond what any graduate student should possess. He caught Zash's wrist, twisted until bones cracked, then delivered a precisely calculated blow to the killer's solar plexus. Impossible, Zash gasped, staring at his broken wrist. You're just a student. How could you have such strength? Appearances can be deceiving, the architect replied, his voice carrying a cold edge that had never belonged to Alex Thorne. Batman's enhanced optics caught the impossible movement through the lecture hall windows. Alex Thorne, a mild-mannered graduate student with a solid alibi, was fighting with skills that defied explanation. But more than that, his fighting style was too controlled, too precise. This wasn't someone defending themselves in panic. That's not Alex Thorne. That's the architect, disguised as Alex. Batman realized, his mind racing. Batman grappled down from his perch, moving toward the psychology building with deadly purpose. If the architect was impersonating Alex, then he was about to commit murder while wearing an innocent man's face. Bruce couldn't let that happen. The architect sensed Batman's approach long before the Dark Knight reached the building. Enhanced hearing picked up the whistle of the grappling line and the subtle change in air pressure as the cape cut through the night. He had perhaps 60 seconds before Batman arrived. Perfect timing, the architect thought, his cellular structure already beginning to prepare for the next phase. Zash was on his knees now, cradling his broken wrist, his blade scattered across the floor. "What are you?" he whispered. "Justice," the architect replied, then struck his neck, sending Zash into unconsciousness. As footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, the architect's body began to flow like liquid. His biomass expanded, engulfing Zash's unconscious form while simultaneously reshaping itself. In seconds, Victor Zash stood where Alex had been, his distinctive scars and cruel features perfectly replicated. But wrapped within the architect's biomass, controlled like a puppet, was the real Zash wearing Alex Thorne's face. The lecture hall door exploded inward as Batman burst through. "Step away from him," Batman commanded, seeing what appeared to be Victor Zash standing over Alex Thorne's prone form. The architect, now wearing Zash's appearance, turned with the killer's characteristic smirk. "Batman. Right on schedule." "I said step away." Batman's voice carried deadly authority as he advanced, batarangs ready. "Or what?" The false Zash laughed. "You'll stop me? You're too late, Bat. The famous psychologist is already mine." Batman struck the false Zash without hesitation, his combat training engaging automatically. The figure wearing Zash's face fought back but was not even remotely skilled enough to seem dangerous. The fight didn't last long. A precisely timed stumble, a calculated opening in his defense, and Batman's nerve strike found its mark. The false Zash collapsed, his body going limp. But as Batman turned toward the figure wearing Alex's face, his stance shifted into combat readiness. "Architect," Batman said coldly, recognizing the controlled fight and well-trained movements. "I know it's you." The false Alex's bewildered expression melted away, replaced by a calculating smile. "Very good, detective. Though I'm curious, what gave me away?" "Alex Thorne is asleep in his apartment," Batman replied, advancing slowly. Thermal imaging confirmed it. "You're using his face, but you're not him. I won't allow you to kill Zash using this face." "Finally decided to care about justice, huh, Batman?" the architect asked, tilting Alex's head with mock curiosity. "It ends here," Batman declared, pulling out specialized restraints designed for enhanced individuals. The false Alex laughed, the sound wrong coming from the young Thorne's throat. "Does it?" The fight erupted in an instant. The architect, wearing Alex's form, moved with inhuman speed and strength, not enough to reveal his full supernatural abilities, but far beyond human limits. Batman adapted quickly, his training allowing him to match the enhanced opponent, but the architect wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to escape. After a brief but intense exchange, the false Alex fainted left, then burst through the lecture hall's window in an explosion of glass and concrete. By the time Batman reached the shattered opening, the figure had vanished into Gotham's maze of rooftops and shadows. Batman cursed under his breath. The architect had escaped, but at least Zash was secured. In the back of the police cruiser, the figure wearing Victor Zash's face sat in silence, hands cuffed behind his back. To the officers, he was just another captured monster, unconscious and defeated. But behind closed eyes, the architect smiled. The deception was perfect. Batman had seen Alex Thorne as a revenge victim of Architect and had watched Architect flee. The real Zash was safely contained within his controlled biomass, ready for the final performance. Phase 1 complete, the architect thought. Now for the real art to begin. The police car pulled away from the university, carrying its precious cargo toward Gotham Central. Behind them, crime scene investigators photographed the lecture hall, never knowing they were documenting the scene of the most elaborate deception in the city's history. When Batman returned to check Alex's apartment, thermal imaging would show the young man safe in his bed, appearing to have slept through the entire ordeal. The perfect alibi, maintained by careful cellular manipulation and precise timing. The hunt was entering its final phase. Notes: this chapter is quite layered. Think of Alex and Architect as two personas in this chapter. 1. MC wants Batman to believe he wore Alex's face to kill Zash as a sort of revenge for the TV program Dis Alex did a few chapters back. It's a way to throw off his psychology profile and reinforces that Architect and MC are two different people. 2. Zash never connected MC and Architect during the fight. 3. When Batman comes in, he sees Zash standing over Alex. Alex knows Batman is aware that the real Architect wouldn't lose so easily. So he staged this scene after shapeshifting. Batman will believe that false Alex was baiting him when he realizes Batman had arrived. This further reinforces his identity swap, eliminating that possibility from Batman's mind. Or, like I said, MC is an expert in psychology. 5. Now why did MC swap? Find out in the next chapter. Chapter 31. Interrogation. The interrogation room at Gotham Central was a study with concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and a single metal table bolted to the floor. Commissioner Gordon stood behind the one-way mirror, watching as Batman prepared to question their prize catch. 3 hours he's been awake, Gordon muttered, taking a drag from his cigarette. Hasn't said a word. Just sits there staring at the wall. Batman studied the figure slumped in the metal chair. Victor Zash looked exactly as he should, scarred flesh telling stories of dozens of kills, dead eyes that held no remorse. But there was something different about his posture, a subtle alertness that seemed at odds with his usual vacant demeanor. "Leave us alone," Batman instructed. Gordon nodded, stubbing out his cigarette. "You've got 20 minutes before the lawyers start screaming." The door closed with a metallic clang, leaving Batman alone with what he believed was Gotham's most prolific serial killer. The architect, wearing Zash's face with perfect precision, looked up with carefully practiced dead eyes. "Batman," he said in Zash's distinctive rasp. "Come to study the monster?" Batman pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "You've been stalking Alex Thorne for days, Zash. Why so long? What's stopping you from taking him?" The false Zash began tracing an invisible pattern on the metal table with his finger, 2 circular motions connected by a straight line. He sat askew in his chair, one shoulder hunched higher than the other. "Scales tip when someone disrespects what they don't understand, Batman. That psychiatrist, he spoke about people like me on television like we are some specimen to be studied. So this is about revenge? Because he exposed the real you publicly." The false Zash continued the tracing motion, his dead eyes staring at Batman. His handcuffs clinked softly as he kept one arm tense on the table while the other hung loose. Of all the zombies pretending to help people, he's the worst kind. He sits in his office, judging minds he can't comprehend, claiming to heal what can't be healed. Batman leaned forward slightly. Why would that affect you? Thorn is trying to help people, Zash. He's a psychiatrist. Justice demands that those who mock what they don't understand face consequences. The false Zash's finger traced the same pattern again, circles and a line. He didn't just mock Architect on that show, Batman. He laughed at me, called me textbook and predictable, and challenged everything I stand for. And that's worth killing him for? The false Zash's vacant stare never wavered as his finger continued the methodical tracing. He tilted his head sharply to one side, never keeping it level. Are you telling me that his arrogance doesn't deserve punishment? He treats broken minds like mine as puzzles to solve, not understanding that some things are meant to stay broken. Batman's eyes narrowed. He's just doing his job. If anything, it's people like you who deserve punishment. Broken people like me don't get second chances, Batman. But he gets to sit there, comfortable and safe, dissecting killers for entertainment. The false Zash traced the pattern more deliberately now, his posture remaining unbalanced as he leaned heavily to one side. His death will teach other doctors to show proper respect. Proper respect is not something your kind will get, Zash. The false Zash finally looked up from his tracing, his dead eyes meeting Batman's. He kept one hand flat on the table while making a loose fist with the other. Batman, you know what it's like to be judged by people who think they understand darkness. He crossed the line when he mocked me publicly. So you're going to kill him because your fragile ego was hurt? I'm going to kill him because he represents everything wrong with this system. Doctors who think they can fix monsters, who profit from our pain. His chair creaked softly as he rocked it slightly, creating an unsteady rhythm. He made me into a joke on television to boost his reputation. Batman stood up, studying the man across from him. This seems more personal than your usual kills. The most important kills are always personal, Batman. This one will send a message: no one mocks Victor Zash and lives. Batman moved toward the door, his mind processing the unusual conversation. Killing him won't change what he said. Balance will be restored when his arrogance is silenced forever. The false Zash's voice carried that familiar emptiness as Batman reached for the door handle. His final gesture was sliding his handcuffs to one side of the table chain, letting them hang unevenly. Every zombie who laughs at monsters learns eventually. He'll learn too. The door closed behind Batman with a metallic clang. Later that night, in the Batcave, Bruce Wayne sat hunched over the evidence table, his cowl pulled back, analyzing forensic samples from some of the crime scenes. The fragments of fabric, trace chemicals, and DNA samples were spread across the illuminated surface as he worked methodically through each piece. Alfred approached with a steaming cup of coffee. "Perhaps you should rest, Master Bruce. It's been 18 hours since—" "Something's wrong," Bruce muttered, not looking up from the microscope. The speech patterns don't match Zash's usual style. His responses are too weird, too different. He stopped mid-sentence, his hand freezing over a blood sample slide. The conversation from the interrogation suddenly crashed back into his consciousness. Not the content, but the delivery. The way each response had started with specific words, as if. Bruce's head snapped up, his eyes wide with sudden realization. "The opening words," he breathed, spinning toward the computer array. "Computer. Emergency analysis. Extract the first word from each of Zash's responses during tonight's interrogation. Display immediately." The massive screens flickered to life, displaying the transcript analysis in seconds. 1. Scales. 2. Of. 3. Justice. 4. R. 5. Broken. 6. Batman. 7. I'm. 8. The. 9. Balance. Bruce shot to his feet, his chair sliding backward across the cave floor. "No, it can't be." His voice rose with urgency as the pattern became crystal clear. "Alfred!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the cavern. "Alfred!" The butler appeared at the top of the stairs, alarmed by the panic in Bruce's voice. "Sir." That wasn't Zash. Bruce was already moving toward the Batsuit, his movement sharp. "I've been played. Completely played." The man I interrogated was delivering a message. "Scales of justice are broken, Batman. I'm the balance." Bruce's hands were flying over the computer keyboard, pulling up the interrogation footage and running facial recognition algorithms. "Computer, analyze microexpressions and speech patterns and compare to Zash's psychological profile from previous encounters. Priority Alpha." Warning alerts began flashing across the screens as the analysis completed in real time. "But sir," Alfred said, descending the stairs, "there's more. Pull up the surveillance footage of his physical behavior." Bruce's fingers flew across the keyboard, displaying the interrogation room footage. "Computer, analyze subject's physical movements and positioning throughout the interrogation." As the analysis ran, Batman watched in growing amazement as the computer highlighted the false Zash's actions: unbalanced posture, asymmetrical hand positions, tracing the scales pattern repeatedly, uneven handcuff positioning, tilted head positions, chair rocking to and fro. He was literally acting out broken scales of justice the entire time, Bruce said grimly. Every movement, every gesture, it was all part of the message. "Alfred," he called out. "Yes, Master Bruce?" "Contact Gordon. I need to speak with Zash again. Now." "At this hour?" "It's nearly 3 a.m. "The person I interrogated tonight wasn't Victor Zash," Bruce said grimly. "And I have a feeling he's long gone by now." The phone rang twice before Gordon's gruff voice answered. "This better be important, Batman." "I need to question Zash again," Bruce said without preamble. "About what?" "You just left 3 hours ago." "The man I interrogated wasn't Victor Zash." There was a pause, then Gordon's voice returned, tighter now. "That's going to be a problem." "What do you mean?" "Zash is gone," Gordon said. "Cell's empty. No sign of how he got out. It's like he just vanished." Bruce continued. "When?" "We discovered it an hour ago. I was about to call you." "I'm on my way." Bruce hung up and stared at the message on the screen. The architect had played him completely, using the interrogation not just to escape, but to deliver his manifesto directly to Batman's face. "Scales of justice are broken, Batman. I'm the balance." Gotham Central Police Station, 3:47 a.m. Batman stood in the empty cell, his cape billowing in the air. The concrete walls showed signs of recent activity, scratches and markings that hadn't been there before, some in Zash's characteristic tally marks, others in what looked like more deliberate notation. "How long between my leaving and the discovery?" Batman asked Gordon. "Maybe 2 hours, Gordon replied, his cigarette smoke curling in the fluorescent light. "Guards check every 30 minutes. He was there at 1:15, gone at 1:45. Batman studied the wall markings more closely. Hidden among what appeared to be random scratches were coordinates and what looked like fragments of academic notation. "Get me a UV light," Batman instructed. When the black light revealed the hidden writing, Batman's suspicions were confirmed. Etched into the concrete in precise script were psychological notes, and below them, in the same careful handwriting, was an address: Ace Chemicals, Warehouse 47. "Son of a bitch," Gordon muttered. "He's been planning this the whole time." Batman stared at the wall, his mind racing. The hidden message during the interrogation, the elaborate escape, and the breadcrumbs left behind, it was all part of a larger game. "This isn't Zash," Batman said quietly. "Someone else was in this cell. Someone who wanted us to find this." "The architect?" "Has to be." Batman stepped back, studying the entire wall. "He's been playing us from the beginning. The question is what he wants us to find at that warehouse, and where the real Zash is now." As dawn broke over Gotham City, Batman left the empty cell with a new understanding of the game he'd been playing. The architect hadn't just escaped, he delivered his message, assessed his opposition, and set the stage for the next phase of his plan. But Batman still didn't know who was behind the mask or what his ultimate endgame truly was. One thing was certain: The architect was far more dangerous than he'd initially believed. This wasn't just another vigilante. This was someone who could think several moves ahead with the powers to match it. Chapter 32. The Art of Meaninglessness. Warning: mature themes ahead. The old warehouse reeked of rust and dried blood. This was Zash's private hell, where he'd built his twisted shrine to suffering. Alex carried the unconscious killer through the maze of interconnected rooms, past walls lined with victim photos and disturbing sketches. Zash had turned this place into his personal museum of death, each room chronicling another chapter in his descent into madness. When Zash came to, he found himself strung up between two metal beams, arms stretched wide. His eyes opened with that calmness that had kept him alive through his countless run-ins with Batman. Even suspended and helpless, he actually smiled. Well, Alex Thorne. Zash's voice held that same flat, emotionless tone. Came for a consultation? I do love talking about my work. Alex stepped out of the shadows, and something shifted in his appearance. The young, earnest face began to change, features flowing like melted wax. What emerged looked human enough, but there was something fundamentally wrong about the proportions. Zash's smile widened into something genuinely delighted. Oh, this is beautiful. His voice paused as the pieces fell into place. I should have known it was you. The architect. The one who's been cleaning house in my city. The stories about your shapeshifting were real after all. Your city. Alex's voice deepened as his transformation completed. You think Gotham belongs to you? I think Gotham understands me, Zash said with genuine warmth, as if discussing a beloved pet. Every scream, every plea for mercy, the city drinks it up. We're partners, you could say. I provide the art, Gotham provides the canvas. Tell me about Emma Walsh, Alex said suddenly. Zash's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Ah, Emma. My little songbird who flew away. Do you know what she did when I had her tied up in her apartment? She fought like a wildcat. Magnificent woman, even with all the injuries, she was spitting curses at me, protecting her daughter. His voice took on an admiring tone. She was one of the difficult ones. Took me some time to break her. She escaped. She did. Zash said with genuine professional respect. Clever girl. Of course. And when I find her again, and I will, give her the super deluxe treatment she deserves. I'm going to make her watch while I start on her daughter first this time. Zash's voice took on the tone of someone describing their favorite recipe. Children make the best motivators, you know. You won't touch them. Won't I? I've been studying her too for the past few days. I know all about those little security details the cops provide her and her daughter. He spoke about Emma and her daughter like they were just an afterthought. But Zash wasn't finished. I remember this businessman I worked on last year. The killer continued conversationally. Corporate type, thought he was tough. Had him strung up for hours, explaining exactly what I was going to do to his family after I finished with him. You know what finally broke him? When I started describing his 5-year-old daughter in detail, what she wore to school, which playground she liked, how she'd look with one of my scars. Zash's smile became something truly obscene. He begged me to take his wife instead. He even offered me his own mother. Started naming every person he knew, bargaining with their lives for his daughter's safety. That's when I knew I'd found my true calling, not just killing, but revealing what people really are when hope dies. Enough, Alex said quietly. The beautiful part. Zash continued, lost in his own memories. After I killed him anyway, I sent photos of his corpse to his wife. She killed herself that same night. Murder-suicide, took the daughter with her. 1 kill, 3 deaths. Buy 1 get 2 free. Ha 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 ha. The ultimate combo package. Now that's efficiency. I said enough. Strange tendrils began to emerge from Alex's fingertips. You want to talk about art, Zash? About purpose? Let me show you what real artistry looks like. The first thing to go was the scars. Each mark Zash had carved into his flesh to commemorate a kill. The architect's biomas didn't just erase them, it devoured them completely, leaving smooth, unmarked skin behind. Zash's reaction was immediate. His eyes went wide with pure terror as he watched his life's work disappear. No. What are you doing? Those scars are everything. Each one is a life I freed. You can't just, I can. I am. Alex's voice was cold as winter. 33 scars. 33 people who died in agony. But they mattered to someone. You? You're going to be forgotten completely. No. Stop. They're my legacy. My purpose. For the first time in years, Victor Zash begged. Without them, I'm nothing. I'm nobody. Exactly. Another section of scarred flesh vanished. That businessman you mentioned? His name was Paul Walker. He worked 60 hours a week to provide for his family. His daughter Mia loved unicorns and wanted to be a veterinarian. His wife, Maya, taught kindergarten. They mattered. They had meaning. You were just the disease that killed them. As each scar disappeared, Zash became more frantic, thrashing against his restraints. You don't understand. I gave their deaths purpose. Without me, they died for nothing. They died because you murdered them. Their lives had purpose because they were loved. You're just the monster who ended them. Alex consumed the last of the scars, leaving Zash's skin completely unmarked. There. Now you're as meaningless as you always were. Zash stared down at his smooth, featureless skin in horror. The physical record of his crimes, his identity, his purpose, his very sense of self, had been erased. He could tolerate death, but this, what have you done to me? Zash raged. Now for the rest, Alex said calmly. The limbs went next. Strange tendrils consumed Zash's arms, with the flesh simply ceasing to exist. The killer screamed, not from physical pain, but from the existential terror of watching himself disappear piece by piece. What are you? He gasped as his legs vanished. I'm what crawls out when the law fails completely, Zash. When judges let monsters walk free. When cops protect killers instead of victims. The biomass continued its work, leaving only Zash's torso and head. I'm the consequence of your actions, Victor. Every victim you carved up, every family you destroyed, I'm what that creates. Please, Zash whimpered, reduced now to just a head and torso. I'll stop. I'll never kill again. You'll never do anything again. Alex's voice carried terrible finality. But first, you're going to experience what your victims felt. The helplessness. The terror. The knowledge that no one is coming to save you. Then began the systematic removal of Zash's senses, one by one. His sense of smell went first. Biomass invaded his nasal passages, not blocking them but consuming the very structures that processed scent. Zash's face contorted in confusion as the musty warehouse air became nothing, not scentless, but incomprehensible. What's happening to me? His voice cracked with panic. I'm taking away everything that connects you to the world, Alex replied. Just like you took away everything from your victims. His hearing disappeared next. The biomass crept into his ears, absorbing the delicate mechanisms of sound. The last thing Zash heard was his own scream, cut off mid-note as silence swallowed him whole. His mouth kept moving, forming words he could no longer hear himself speak. The terror in his eyes was absolute now as he realized he was trapped in perfect silence. His sense of taste followed. The biomass invaded his mouth, consuming taste buds and nerve endings. Zash tried to bite his own tongue, a final desperate attempt to feel something, anything, but even that sensation was stolen from him. Then came touch. The biomass invaded his nervous system, severing connections between tactile receptors and the brain. Not numbness. Numbness was still a sensation. This was the complete absence of physical awareness. Total sensory deprivation. Zash could no longer feel the restraints and couldn't sense temperature or pressure or pain. His body became a foreign object he could see but not experience. His eyes darted frantically, the only sense remaining, the only connection to the outside world. Those eyes held pure, animal terror as he watched Alex approach for the final act. "This is the worst part, Victor," Alex said, knowing Zash could see his lips moving but couldn't hear the words. "You're going to watch your last connection to reality disappear. Then you'll spend the eternity alone with your thoughts, unable to perceive anything else. Ever." Zash's eyes went impossibly wide as he understood what was coming. He tried to close them, tried to look away, but found he'd lost even that control. The biomass crept over his eyes slowly, deliberately. Not all at once, but gradually, like a curtain falling. First, his peripheral vision dimmed. Then shadows crept in from the edges, slowly consuming his field of sight. Zash watched his world shrink to a pinpoint of light, then to nothing. Absolute darkness. Absolute silence. Absolute isolation. When it was finished, what remained was a perfectly round sphere resembling a head sitting atop a limbless torso. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, and no sensory organs of any kind. Both head and torso were completely smooth and featureless, sustained by organic tubes that had grown into the warehouse's foundation. Inside that biological prison, Victor Zash remained fully conscious, fully aware, but completely severed from any external stimuli. He would spend eternity contemplating the meaninglessness he had inflicted on others, with nothing but his own thoughts for company. "Sleep tight, Victor," Alex whispered to the sphere, knowing it could neither hear nor respond. "You wanted to show people what they really were when everything was stripped away. Now you get to find out what you are when everything is gone. This is my art dedicated to you. My art of meaninglessness." When Batman arrived 20 minutes later, following the trail the architect had left, nothing could have prepared him for what awaited in the central chamber. The smell hit him first, something organic and wrong, like flesh that had been twisted against all natural law. His tactical light swept across the room, past the victim photos and crude sketches, until it landed on something impossible. In the center of the room was a perfectly spherical head sitting atop a limbless torso. Both were completely smooth, unmarked, and featureless, like something sculpted from pale clay. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. No scars, no distinguishing marks of any kind. Organic tubes connected the torso to what appeared to be a biological life support system that had grown into the warehouse's foundation. The torso pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Batman approached cautiously, scanner already running. The readings were impossible. Human DNA, but restructured and reorganized. Living tissue that had been transformed beyond current medical understanding. "Alfred," he whispered into his comm, "I need a full forensic team. And prep the containment protocols." Another architect scene, Master Bruce? Worse. Batman circled the organic form, noting the broken scale scattered nearby, the killer's signature. It's not just an execution anymore. He's creating something new. The body showed no signs of sensory organs, no way to perceive or interact with the outside world. But Batman's scanners detected complex neural activity, conscious thought patterns trapped within this humanoid prison. "This thing is still alive," he breathed. "Still conscious." Based on the DNA analysis, this had once been Victor Zash. Now it was something else entirely, a perfect sphere of unmarked flesh, denied even the basic dignity of a human form. For the first time in years, Batman felt genuine horror at what passed for justice in his city. The bony broken scales caught his flashlight beam, and the message was clear: the scales of justice are broken. I am the balance. But what kind of balance required reducing a human being to this? As sirens wailed in the distance, Batman took one last look at the sphere that had once been Victor Zash. Inside that featureless prison, one of Gotham's most dangerous killers would spend eternity in complete sensory deprivation, conscious but unable to perceive anything beyond his own thoughts. It was perfect justice. It was an absolute nightmare. Chapter 33: The Architect Effect. The soft glow of the television illuminated Emma Walsh's face as she sat curled on her couch, a cup of tea growing cold in her trembling hands. The late-night news anchor's voice carried across her small apartment with clinical detachment. Victor Zash, the notorious serial killer known as the Professor of Pain, has been found in what medical experts are calling an unprecedented condition. The suspect, discovered in an abandoned warehouse in Gotham's industrial district, appears to have been rendered completely incapacitated through unknown means. Emma's breath caught. The photograph on screen showed a man she'd never forget, the same dead eyes that had haunted her nightmares for months. But now those eyes were gone, replaced by smooth skin. The news report continued with medical terminology she didn't understand: complete sensory deprivation, biologically impossible, conscious but unresponsive. She didn't need to understand the details. Victor Zash, the monster who had carved her body and soul, would never hurt anyone again. For the first time in years, Emma felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. Walking to her bedroom, she opened the small wooden box on her nightstand. Inside lay a black envelope with a blood-red wax seal, now cracked and faded. She'd kept it as a reminder of hope in her darkest moments. Tonight, she wouldn't need it anymore. The envelope caught fire easily in her kitchen sink, the flame consuming the words, "When justice fails, judgment comes." As the ashes swirled down the drain, Emma whispered to the empty air, "Thank you, whoever you are." 3 floors below street level, in the basement of a condemned tenement building, Vincent Torino's nephew scrolled through encrypted messages on his burner phone. The underground network was alive with chatter, fear spreading through Gotham's criminal ecosystem like a virus. Gothcrony_87. Heard about the pain professor. Same shit that happened to Torino. Chillin' with fries. My cousin worked Hayden's crew. Found him turned inside out. Literally. Scarface Tony. This ain't no vigilante. Batman don't do this kind of shit. Knife dancer. Criminals got hit so far. Torino. Some judges and cops know this. Pattern's clear. Gothcrony_87. What pattern? Random psycho targeting criminals? Knife dancer. Nothing random about it. Targets all had victims that contacted that urban legend. The final court or something. Chillin' with fries. Bullshit. That's just a story. Knife dancer. Story just put Zash in a freaking weird coma. You still think it's bullshit? The messages continued, but Vincent's nephew had read enough. He made 3 phone calls, each to a different area code. Within an hour, similar conversations were happening in secure locations across the city. The word was spreading. Something inhuman was hunting them. Commissioner Gordon's office was heavy with unspoken tension. Crime statistics covered his desk like fallen leaves, each report telling the same impossible story. Batman stood by the window, his cape creating a shadow against the faint morning light. 40% drop in violent crime, Gordon said, tapping his pen against the latest report. 40%. Batman. In 1 month. This fear isn't sustainable, Batman replied, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. Eventually, they'll adapt or someone worse will fill the vacuum. Gordon leaned back in his chair, studying the vigilante who'd become his unofficial partner over the years. You've seen the Zash scene. The medical examiner's report. This isn't just killing anymore, it's becoming something else entirely. Tactic, Batman said simply. It's a calculated tactic crafted to strike fear into the hearts of others. And it's working. Gordon held up another report. Street dealers abandoning territories. Loan sharks fleeing the city. For the first time in 20 years, parents in the East End are letting their kids play outside after dark. Batman turned from the window, his expression hidden but his posture tense. The ends don't justify the means, Jim. Murder-based fear is what separates us from them. Maybe, Gordon conceded, but try telling that to the families who don't have to worry about their daughters being trafficked or their sons being recruited by gangs. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of philosophical differences that had no easy answers. Finally, Batman spoke. I'll find him. When you do, Gordon said quietly, remember that some of us have been fighting this war a lot longer than you have. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy isn't your enemy. Batman's cape swept behind him as he headed for the window. He's not our ally, Jim. He's just another monster wearing a mask of justice. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of the city below, a city that was sleeping more peacefully than it had in decades. 20 feet below ground level, accessed through a forgotten maintenance tunnel that connected to the city's abandoned subway system, Alex Thorne's true workspace buzzed softly with focus. Banks of monitors displayed feeds from across Gotham, police scanners, criminal communication networks, social media sentiment analysis, and news broadcasts. He'd built the sanctuary over a long time, during his first semester at Gotham University. The basement had once been part of the old pneumatic post system, forgotten when the city modernized. Now it served as the nerve center for his campaign. The screens told a story that filled him with satisfaction. Criminal forums burned with paranoid chatter. Police reports showed unprecedented drops in violent crime. News outlets struggled to explain the medical miracles that had befallen Gotham's worst villains. Alex allowed himself a moment of pride as he reviewed his work. The encrypted criminal networks showed him everything he needed to know. Street-level dealers were abandoning their territories. Traffickers were fleeing the city. Loan sharks were forgiving debts rather than risk becoming his next target. But something else was happening. The scattered criminal communications were beginning to coalesce into patterns. Emergency meetings were being scheduled. Code words were being established. The prey was learning to move in herds. Alex leaned back in his chair, studying the data streams. His reputation had become a weapon more powerful than his bioma's abilities. The mere possibility of his attention was reshaping Gotham's criminal landscape. Alex smiled, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he began tracing the digital breadcrumbs left by panicked criminals. They thought organizing together would protect them. They thought numbers would provide safety. They were wrong. The scales of justice didn't recognize strength in numbers. They only recognized guilt and innocence, predator and prey, the corrupt and the pure. As the sun rose over Gotham, casting long shadows from the skyscrapers across the city, Alex Thorne began planning his next move. The criminals were learning to fear him. Good. Fear would make them sloppy. Fear would make them vulnerable. And when they were vulnerable, he would be there to ensure the scales remained balanced. The architect's work was far from over. Chapter 34, Surgical Workshop, R18. Warning: explicit/mature themes ahead. Please skip this chapter if you cannot tolerate such content. This chapter is just an introduction to a villain, Professor PYG. The stench hit first, a nauseating cocktail of rotting flesh, industrial bleach, and something sickeningly sweet that might have been perfume. Deep beneath Gotham's streets, in the abandoned subway maintenance tunnels, Professor PYG had built his cathedral of madness. La Donna e mobile, qual piuma al vento, he sang in a trembling tenor, his pig mask bobbing with each note as he worked. The aria echoed through the concrete tunnels, a beautiful melody corrupted by the horror of its context. Strapped to the surgical table before him, Delilah Vance, a 19-year-old runaway who'd been sleeping rough for 3 months, could only watch in paralyzed terror as PYG selected his instruments. Her eyes, the only part of her still capable of movement, darted frantically between the bone saw, the drill, and the collection of facial features floating in jars of formaldehyde. "Oh, my sweet little pigeon," PYG cooed, his voice muffled by the grotesque mask. "Papa's going to make you so very special. No more dirty thoughts about boys, no more nasty urges. Just perfect, pristine purity." He held up a scalpel, its blade reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. "First, we remove the corruption. The skin holds so much sin, you see. All those times you let filthy men touch you for money, Papa will cut that right off." The first incision was deliberately shallow, designed to maximize pain while keeping the victim conscious. Delilah's paralyzed throat couldn't scream, but her eyes bulged with agony as PYG began peeling back strips of skin from her face. "Semper unamabile, leggiadro viso," he continued singing, painting her exposed muscle tissue with antiseptic. The chemical burned like acid on the raw flesh. "In tears or laughter, still deceitful. That's what the song means, little dove. But Papa will make you honest." Around them, The tunnel walls displayed PYG's gallery of transformation, photographs showing his victims before and after their perfection. But these weren't clean surgical photos. They were trophy shots of the torture process itself, faces being flayed, skulls being opened, and eyes rolling back in agony. Some showed the victims' families, taken before PYG had killed them too, just to watch the light die in his patient's eyes. "You see that pretty girl in the red dress?" PYG gestured to one photo while selecting a bone saw. That was Dolatron 23. She fought Papa so hard when he took her baby away. But look how peaceful she is now. The image showed a young mother, her infant's blood still on her hands, her own face a ruin of surgical mesh and porcelain. The baby's tiny corpse lay discarded in the corner of the photo like garbage. "Papa doesn't like children crying," PYG explained conversationally as he positioned the saw against Delilah's skull. "So messy. So imperfect. Better to make them quiet forever." The saw's teeth bit into bone with a grinding screech. Delilah's body convulsed involuntarily, her nervous system shorting out from the trauma even as the paralytic kept her conscious. "Qual piuma al vento, muta di accento," PYG sang louder, his voice rising to cover the sound of splintering skull. "E di pensiero." But the true horror wasn't the surgery itself, it was what surrounded them. In alcoves carved into the tunnel walls stood 63 Dolatrons, all facing inward to watch their newest sister's creation. Their porcelain faces were identical, painted with the same creepy smile and the same rosy cheeks. But their eyes were still human, still aware, still screaming silently behind the masks. PYG had perfected his technique over the years. The lobotomy was precise enough to destroy free will and personality while leaving consciousness intact. His victims were trapped in their own heads, fully aware but unable to control their bodies, forced to watch as their hands committed atrocities on command. "Watch carefully, my angels," PYG addressed his collection as he opened Delilah's skull. "Papa's going to show you how to make a new sister." He reached into the exposed brain with a long, thin probe. The hippocampus first, that's where she keeps her dirty memories. All those times she spread her legs for strangers, all those drugs she put in her body. Papa will make it all go away. The probe twisted, and something fundamental died in Delilah's eyes. Her memories of childhood, of her mother's lullabies, of the first boy she'd ever kissed, all of it dissolved into electrical static. "Now the frontal lobe," PYG continued his lesson. "This is where she keeps her nasty opinions, her selfish desires. Papa doesn't like selfish little girls." More probing, more destruction. Delilah's personality, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, her love of old movies, and her fear of spiders, all of it was erased. "And finally," PYG said, selecting a smaller instrument, "the parts that make her struggle. Papa likes his children obedient." When he was finished, Delilah's body still breathed, her heart still beat, but everything that had made her human was gone. She was like a living corpse, animated by brainstem reflexes and whatever sick programming PYG chose to install. "A semper misero ci lei essa fida," he sang as he began fitting the porcelain mask over her ruined face. "Ci la confida mal cotto il cor." The mask was beautiful in its simplicity, a young girl's face frozen in eternal innocence, with painted tears that looked almost real. But underneath, Delilah's actual features were a horror show of surgical scars and exposed tissue. "There we are," PYG said, stepping back to admire his work. "Dolatron 64. Isn't she gorgeous?" He helped the newly converted victim to her feet, guiding her to join the others in their silent vigil. She moved like a robot, her head tilted at the same angle as all the rest, her hands folded in the same submissive pose. "Papa loves you all so much," PYG whispered to his collection, his voice filled with genuine emotion. "You're all so perfect now. No more ugly human desires, no more troublesome thoughts. Just pure, beautiful obedience." He turned to a corner of the tunnel where fresh supplies waited, 3 more homeless people, unconscious and ready for processing. Among them was an old man who'd been trying to organize the street community, a teenage boy who'd been asking too many questions about missing friends, and a woman whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Papa's going to make you all so beautiful," he sang to the unconscious forms. "La donna è mobile, qual piuma al vento.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.